I didn't expect Father to vouch for Rex, Clark said as they came in that evening, still a little stunned. David raised an eyebrow. Do you think Father would lie just to give Rex trouble? Clark scratched his chin. It felt impossible. What his father had said was almost a challenge to everything Jonathan had taught them. Honesty is a bright mirror that shows your character. I don't want that mirror to be tarnished in front of you. Jonathan, just inside the door, took off his coat and spread his arms. Especially in front of you two, he said with a grin. The farm had done well today, the fruit brought a good price, and he was in a jovial mood. Who was late for a date when they were young, clearly overslept, but swore their motorcycle broke down halfway here? Martha shook her head as she came in from the kitchen. Sometimes a little white lie is harmless, she said, washing her hands as she spoke. Jonathan gave his wife a sheepish hug and winked at the boys. Otherwise, how would we have this warm home? Despite the relaxed atmosphere, Clark could tell Jonathan still didn't like Rex. Today was so strange, he said. Rex never left the market, so who robbed the bank? He replayed the day in his head. Many people had seen Rex at the stand. The bank's CCTV footage had shown someone who looked like Lex Luthor. The bank manager said he went to withdraw money. He was treated like a big client, but when it came time to sign, the signature didn't match. The manager asked to see an ID, and then the robber pulled a gun. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Maybe the robber just looked a lot like Lex Luthor, Martha offered from the sink. Rex has only been in town a short while. People don't know him well yet. Mistakes happen. Maybe, Clark agreed, remembering how Jack Gold in school had imitated his English teacher and fooled half the class until he got caught. Or someone thought they resembled Lex and decided to try their luck. David had been quiet, thoughtful. He met Clark's eyes, and both of them understood what the other was thinking, but they didn't say it out loud. Even if their parents suspected something about metahumans, they didn't want to worry them. After dinner, they climbed up to the attic above the warehouse. The night breeze cool against their faces, they looked out over the wheat fields under the moonlight. Clark had slipped back from somewhere without telling anyone. "Where did you go?" David asked. "Nowhere," Clark said, scratching his head. He'd gone out because the fight between David and Garrick earlier had torn up the road. He'd been worried someone might hit the hole in the dark. "You're a good person to worry about others," he added. David sighed. "When I went to check, the town road crew had just finished. They were baffled by the damage, said even if a dozen-ton piece of steel fell off a truck, it wouldn't make a crater like that." Clark glanced at him and tried a casual question. "David, how strong are you?" David's eyes narrowed. "Trying to make up for lost brother time with arm wrestling?" "How old are you?" David jabbed back. "No, I'm not interested." "You should work on hiding your intention when you talk," Clark said, annoyed that his question had been so transparent. David put his hands in his pockets and looked at the field. "You weren't just asking about my strength." Clark flushed. He hadn't been entirely innocent. He wanted to know how much force David could use so he'd know how to handle another Garrick-style ruckus without going too far. David saw through him and cut it off. "Save it. I won't tell you." Then softer. "To be honest, I don't even know myself." "Do you think the person who posed as Rex to rob the bank could be a metahuman?" Clark asked. 2 metahumans in a short time had put that possibility on his mind. David didn't rule it out. Perhaps, but not every odd thing is a metahuman. "If it is, maybe he can take bullets," Clark said, grim. Even Jarek, who fought like he could lift hundreds of tons, didn't have that kind of resistance. Eyewitnesses had said the robber wore only a light suit, and yet was shot twice in the back and ran off unharmed. To the average person, the only explanation was a hidden bulletproof vest. David gave his shoulder a reassuring pat. "Don't worry, a bank robber probably won't be interested in the farm." Then he headed downstairs to bed, but Clark stayed up a little longer, troubled by the thought of someone like that hiding in town. Thump, thump, thump. Early the next morning, Catherine came up the little staircase at the back of the antique shop, a red backpack heavy with cash slung over her shoulder. Gray threaded through her hair. She was out of breath as she knocked on her daughter's bedroom door. "Tina, where did you get all this money?" she demanded. Tina emerged, towel wrapped around her shoulders, one hand idly drying her hair. I told you life would get better, she said. You didn't rob the bank yesterday, did you? Catherine clutched at the hope that her daughter was bluffing. Of course I didn't. Tina smiled in a way that made Catherine relax for a second, but then the smile changed. Click. Flesh shifted like clay. Tina's body lengthened, her frame broadened, and her hair and features melted away. Standing where Tina had been was a taller, bald figure with that same cold, familiar smirk. Lex Luthor did it, the imposter said. Chapter 22. The Black. Lex Luthor did it. Lex Luthor did it, Tina said in a rough man's voice flippant. Then she dropped the affectation and twisted a strand of hair between her fingers, a trace of regret crossing her features. It's a shame my signature gave me away. If it hadn't, I wouldn't have had to snatch it yesterday. You promised you wouldn't use that ability anymore. Catherine's lips trembled with anger and hurt. The idea that her daughter had actually robbed a bank cut her to the bone. I'm doing this for our own good, Tina insisted, pupils bright with excitement and her face flushed. Look at this money. This is just the beginning. Soon I'll be living like Lana. Lana's aunt's flower shop was a real, profitable business, a world away from their ramshackle antique shop on a forgotten street. Ever since they were children, Tina had envied Lana. Wealthy family, pretty, always the center of attention. Enough. I won't see you get hurt, Catherine said, voice cracking. Hurt? Tina laughed as if it were a joke. That bank guard shot me twice in the back. It only ruined one of my suits. Tina, no one's life is perfect, Catherine tried softer, but Lana's seems to be. Those words turned Tina's face hard. She had heard them for years. Lana, the swan. Tina, the ugly duckling on the roadside. This money was stolen, Catherine said, making up her mind. She put on a grim expression and headed for the stairs. I'm going to return it. I'll tell them I found it next to a garbage truck. Don't be like that, Mother. Why can't we have some happiness? Tina snapped and lunged for the school bag Catherine was carrying. In the scuffle, she grabbed too hard. The bag slipped from Catherine's hands and she stumbled backwards. Her old body tumbled down the stairs, rolled, and her head struck the wall hard. She lay still, unconscious. Mom! Tina's eyes went wide. She dropped the bag and darted to her mother's side, fumbling for her phone to call for help. For a moment she hovered, fingers trembling over the screen. Then something hardened in her expression. She set the phone down without calling. Before physical education class. The boys were changing in the locker room. Ah! Clark's vision blurred, and he instinctively rubbed his eyes. When he opened them again, the room had become something from a nightmare. Flesh clung to bones like a macabre film, blue-violet veins visible beneath the skin. He recoiled. Clark? Pietro, next to him, frowned at the shout. In Clark's eyes, a figure that should have been a person appeared instead, as a skeleton covered thinly in flesh, turning its head toward him. Clark backed away. My eyes! What's wrong? David, mid-change, looked up from his shirt. He could only see Clark backing away and screaming. As Clark stumbled back, his vision pierced through the wall, and he saw the girls' locker room next door. Girls in their underwear were changing, and among them was Lana. Clark's gaze locked there, reverent and fixed, a small, involuntary smile forming on his face. Pietro watched Clark's sudden calm with concern. After the panic, he was now staring blankly at the wall, smiling as if caught in a private daydream. What's with your eyes? Pietro asked again. Clark came to himself and brushed Pietro off. Pietro left first. Clark stayed and finished changing more slowly than usual, his eyes still lingering toward the wall. David followed and glanced between Clark and the girls' locker room, and his expression changed into a knowing smirk. You're bleeding from the nose, Clark. Clark instinctively wiped at his nose, finding nothing. I wouldn't just... David crossed his arms and gave a teasing look, like someone who'd caught you in a bad habit. Under his stare, Clark felt suddenly guilty, slavishly moving his eyes elsewhere. David's tone was light but pointed. You probably developed a new trick, seeing through things. Later at home, Clark sat on the sofa. Martha looked worried. Jonathan stroked her back. David lounged against the dining table, arms folded, a faint smile on his face. Clark kept his gaze low. Sometimes I can see through things, like X-ray vision, Clark said quietly, voice muffled, as if apologizing. Can you control it? Jonathan asked, concern creasing his brow. Clark's abilities had begun appearing more frequently, 2 days ago, he'd started to float for a short time. The sudden, unexplained changes had made them all uneasy. I don't know how, Clark admitted, glancing toward David. Do you? David shrugged, smirking. Before PE, you kept staring at the wall. You weren't failing. You were choosing what to see. David's remark felt like a rebuke. Clark thought of the girl's locker room and the helpless little smile he hadn't been able to stop himself from giving. Eyes have muscles too, blinking, focusing. You can practice controlling it, David added. He wasn't lecturing from moral high ground. He was nudging responsibility. Martha went to gather some clothes, telling Clark to be careful, visibly relieved that the ability itself wasn't dangerous. Jonathan left to tend to the cows. David came closer, having noticed Clark's shameful expression. What else did you want to tell Mom and Dad? He asked, teasing. Thinking of confessing. David gave the question a casual drawl. There's nothing wrong with being honest. Clark's face flushed. My strength has been increasing a lot lately, he said, dropping his voice when he realized his parents were out of the room. The newest change worried him enough that he hadn't mentioned it earlier. David raised an eyebrow. What do you think is causing it? Clark sat back and thought. The emergence of X-ray vision seemed inevitable, but the sudden jump in strength felt less predictable. Maybe it's late-stage puberty. People go through big physical changes at this age. David considered that for a moment. You're not an alien? He asked, then laughed lightly at the absurdity of his own question. Aliens have puberty too, right? You might be right, David said with a playful grin that implied more than the words alone. Clark's face only reddened further. Pro 23. No one can hinder me. A gust of cold wind cut through the little town that afternoon, and everything felt gray and sluggish, as if the whole place were waiting for rain. Martha had gone out to run errands. Clark and David followed to help carry her shopping. Pedestrians hurried by under low clouds. As Clark nudged 2 large bottles of discounted laundry detergent into the car, the world snapped. His vision blurred. The colors drained away until everything looked like an old black and white film. People on the street turned into X-rayed skeletons. A woman carrying a basket of vegetables walked past, and Clark's first reaction was to jump back. David saw it happen. Control your gift with your heart, he said quietly. Don't fear it. Don't fight it. David's tone was gentle but firm. He'd watched other Kryptonians adapt. Zod, for example, had learned to handle sudden powers within minutes of exposure to Earth's sun, a discipline born of training. Clark, less practiced, always resisted when his gifts appeared. That resistance made him falter. It made him feel alien. Think about why you could always control it before gym class, David added. Clark opened his mouth, then froze. In his altered sight, one skeleton near the antique shop didn't look like the rest. The others were pallid and X-ray-like. This one glowed with a jade-green fluorescence, like a meteorite. The sight tightened something in Clark's chest. Those meteorites had come with him to Earth. He didn't understand them, but every time he'd been near them, he'd felt weak, hollowed out. Is it happening again? Martha asked, noticing her eldest son's expression. No, I'm fine, Clark said automatically, though his heart thudded. The green skeleton moved toward the antique shop. Clark drew a slow breath and tried to stop the vision by not fighting it, by relaxing instead of clamping down. 2 seconds later, the world returned to normal. He was relieved and oddly exhilarated. David was right. If I don't resist it, I can control it. He glanced at David and felt a twinge of frustration. This power was his, and yet his younger brother seemed to understand it better than he did. David only smirked. Superman's an idealistic creature, he said dryly. Martha, pleased to see Clark calming down, changed the subject. Weren't you going to the antique shop? She asked. We need that lamp in the bedroom fixed. Aunt Catherine said she'd have a look at it. Clark had seen the green surface skeleton enter that very shop. He followed his mother and brother as they went inside. The bell over the door jingled. The shop smelled of dust and oil and old paper. Porcelain and horn lay behind glass cases, oil paintings leaned against walls, a row of ornate clocks ticked, and colorful embroideries hung in uneven rows. A few hand-sized African-style carvings sat in a shadowed corner. If this was an antique shop, it had been reduced to a catch-all. David glanced about with a skeptical lift of an eyebrow. Most of it's from last week, he muttered. Catherine stepped out from a back room with a practiced smile. The woman who stood before Martha looked exactly like the Catherine Martha had known for years. Same nose, same eyes, even the same laugh lines. "How's business?" she asked, upbeat. "Not bad," Martha said. "I'm just here to pick up the lamp." Catherine blinked, then went to the back to look for it. Clark wasted no time. He tried to activate his vision again. He forced his eyelids to remain steady and relaxed the tension in his chest. After several seconds, he managed it. Behind the counter, something that looked like bone glowed faintly with that eerie meteorite light. But it wasn't as tall as before. The hunched figure he'd seen earlier had shifted, smaller, stooped. Had there been two of them? Clark remembered that Catherine's daughter, Tina, went to the local high school. His stomach tightened. When Catherine returned empty-handed, she sniffed once and narrowed her eyes. David caught it first. "What's that smell?" he asked. Clark couldn't detect anything, but David, more in tune somehow, had picked up a faint, elusive odor. Martha, ordinary nose and all, noticed nothing. "I'm sorry, Martha," Catherine said apologetically. "The lamp isn't fixed yet. Can you come back next week?" Her voice sounded strained. Martha laughed it off. "Of course." She and her sons turned to leave, but something near the counter caught her eye. A wad of cash peeked out from under a low cabinet beside the stairs. She bent and picked it up. "What's this?" Catherine's face went pale. "Thank you. Oh, thank you, Martha. I'm such an idiot." She snatched the bundle, her fingers tight and hurried. "A customer paid in cash, and I've been looking for it all day." "That's a lot of money," Martha said, holding it up. "Be careful with that." Outside, as they walked down the street, the three of them lowered their voices. "That bundle had a savings and loan bank band on it," Martha whispered. The town bank had been robbed that morning. A stack of $10,000 bound in the bank's band had gone missing. Seeing it here in Catherine's shop made the hairs on the back of Martha's neck stand up. "Catherine says a customer left it, but we all know her shop hasn't been open much lately." "I didn't like the way she looked when the money turned up," David said. He remembered Catherine's little flicker of panic. Clark's gaze drifted back to the shop window. He saw something that made his breath hitch. Inside, the hunched figure he'd glimpsed a moment before was straightening. The shape lengthened, the shoulders broadened, and the posture shifted into the taller silhouette he'd seen earlier, the same figure that had glowed like meteorite light. And inside a glass display cabinet, nearly hidden among other trinkets, lay a woman's body. Her skin was slack, her hair unkempt. She was old, bent, and unmistakably dead, her heart no longer beating, her blood clotted. Clark's throat tightened. "I don't think that was Aunt Catherine," he said slowly. Martha stopped. "Then who was it?" Clark swallowed. "I don't know, but there's a corpse in their cabinet. Someone she's known for years might be dead, and her body has been in that shop. The possibility of that, and the sight of a living person, Catherine, standing where that corpse had been, made his insides go cold." Martha's face went pale. She decided they should go home and tell Jonathan, her husband, before getting more involved. Even if her eldest could do things ordinary people couldn't, she didn't want him getting dragged into something dangerous. They left hurriedly. Once the door closed and the bell's sound faded, the thing in the shop changed. Where a living figure had been, flesh flowed like soft clay, slumping and reshaping until the taller form collapsed back into the motionless body in the cabinet. The face settled into a familiar curve, and a name slipped into the dark. Tina. An unasked question, how much of what they'd just seen had been real, hung in the air. The shop, dim and cluttered, fell silent for a beat, and then a chill voice cut through it like a blade. "No one can stop me from taking my happiness." 24. Just in case back home, the questions came fast. "Are you saying you saw Catherine, but Catherine might already be dead?" Jonathan asked, still trying to piece it together. After hearing his wife and two sons recount what they'd seen at the antique shop, the green glow, the misshapen skeleton, the body, the money, Jonathan was temporarily bewildered. "The person who greeted us in the shop is supposed to be the one who robbed the bank?" David connected the dots with what Clark had said earlier. First, it was Luther, then Catherine. The person can shapeshift, take on other people's faces. Who could that be? Martha rubbed her arms, suddenly cold. The idea that someone could become a familiar face and approach without anyone noticing terrified her. Clark frowned, thinking. The skeleton had been female, and there weren't many other leads. "It's Tina," he said. David hesitated a few seconds, then explained. The rest of the family watched him, puzzled. "Why Tina?" Clark asked. "She could change appearances. If she killed someone, why take the risk of putting on Aunt Catherine's face after the murder? The police wouldn't be able to ignore her if she was Catherine's only living relative." David's voice had the calm logic of someone piecing an argument together. If Catherine is dead, the detectives will look for her next of kin. Tina would be questioned either way. So she steals the money, then kills her mother, and takes on her appearance out of guilt, or to hide. Either way, she's the obvious suspect. "Catherine!" Martha cried, grief tightening her voice for the woman she'd known. "Don't be so sure, son." Jonathan held Martha's cold hand and frowned. The idea of a daughter killing her mother was almost unbearable. David noticed his father's instinctive refusal to accept such a thing and said nothing. Clark added what he remembered. Her skeleton glowed a strange green, he said. The ribs weren't normal, uneven thickness, not smooth like a regular person. David's face went serious. Catherine wasn't young when she had Tina. Tina was born with osteochondrodysplasia. The word sounded clinical in the kitchen. Martha went pale. They and her husband took her to every doctor they could, she said. The doctors thought she might not live past first grade. They spent everything on experimental treatments, but nothing helped. Jonathan finished the recollection quietly. They finally brought Tina back to the town. Then, somehow, she began to get better. David's hypothesis fit the pieces. When the meteorite fell, a lot of quacks showed up, saying the meteorite water could cure anything. If there was only one thing left to try, of course they'd try it. The water could have been infused with the meteorite for years. That would explain the glow in her bones and why she might be stronger or different. Clark's eyes widened. The green glow made sense now. Tina had been drinking meteorite-infused water since she was a child. "Call the police," Clark said. "Now." Jonathan listened. He picked up the phone and described the situation briefly. Possible bank money found at Catherine's shop and a cadaverous smell. The police dispatched officers immediately and headed to the antique shop. "All right," Jonathan said when he hung up. "The police are on their way." David didn't relax. Even if Tina's here and shape-shifting, if she's caught on the spot, she can't escape. Clark wasn't convinced. That's not foolproof. He remembered something David hadn't mentioned. Someone exposed to the meteorite might become physically resilient, maybe even bulletproof. Ordinary officers might be helpless against a target like that. David surprised them both. "I'm going to take the afternoon off school." He thought about the meteorite, the way prolonged exposure or ingestion could amplify someone's abilities. If more exposure makes powers stronger, then someone like Tina, who's had it her whole life, could be dangerous. Clark nodded, tense. "I'll stay too." He glanced at their parents. Better to have both of them there to protect Jonathan and Martha than to risk being apart. Superman deals with threats sometimes even he can't handle easily, but between the two of us, we'll be safer. Their parents looked startled. "Are you afraid Tina will attack us?" Martha asked. Before either son could answer, there was a knock at the door. Through the outer glass, in the dim afternoon light, Lex Luthor stood on the porch with a polite smile. "May I come in?" he asked. Jonathan and Martha straightened. The sons moved instinctively to stand between their parents and the door. David flicked a look at Clark. Clark tried to trigger his X-ray vision, but hesitated, nerves slowing him. Lex noticed the hesitation and raised his hands in a joking, non-threatening gesture. "It's me, no evil twin, and I'm not holding a gun," he said. "Clark, David, Mr. Kent, you know I'm innocent, right?" Clark concentrated this time. The familiar faint burn behind his eyes as he used X-ray vision finally came. He scanned Lex from head to toe. The sight steadied. The skeleton was normal. He breathed and let a small smile loosen his face. "Lex, what are you doing here?" Jonathan asked, tension easing. Lex stepped inside, offering thanks. "I came to thank you both. Without your witness testimony, I wouldn't have been cleared." He glanced around the house, taking in the family's strained expressions. "I watched the CCTV. Seeing someone rob a bank with my face was unsettling." Martha relaxed enough to manage a polite smile. If not for the different signature on the withdrawal slips, I might be paying for it myself. Lex's smile dimmed with a touch of genuine confusion. He had planned a friendly visit, maybe to make acquaintances, but the atmosphere in the Kent home was heavy and uneasy. After a few minutes of small talk and another expression of gratitude, he took his leave. Outside, Lex paused by his silver-gray convertible, looked back toward the house, and frowned as if something about the visit didn't fit. Then he drove away. Jonathan turned to his sons. "You two stay home with us," he said. "I'll call an acquaintance and see if the police have anything. You're not going anywhere today." He'd find a reason for keeping them. Spring flu, the usual thing parents used. But the intent was plain. He wasn't letting them out of his sight until he knew his family was safe. "Start with you, Martha." Jonathan called the police as dusk fell. The small-town officers arrived, took a statement, and then Chief Bob, the menacingly familiar face of Jonathan's high school classmate, came with a couple of deputies. "Bob, did you catch the killer?" Jonathan asked. "We found Catherine's body in her antique shop," Bob replied. "No money was taken. Whoever did this may have moved it. We staked it out for a while, but the killer slipped away. We found no one suspicious in town. Catherine's daughter Tina is missing. We fear she may be involved, or may be a victim herself." After the autopsy, the pathologist said the body had been dead for some time, Bob added, frowning, "which means it probably wasn't the woman Martha met today." Jonathan had no answer. After Bob left, he sank into a chair and sighed to his wife and sons. "Bad news. The police found no leads." "Maybe that's actually good," Martha said, worried. "Tina has unusual abilities. A gun might not stop her. If they run into her, Bob and his men could be in danger." David and Clark exchanged looks, neither surprised the police hadn't caught Tina. Night slid across the farm. Stars spread. A cold wind bent the wheat low. Under the farmhouse's porch light, David and Clark stood one on each side of the door, ready. If Tina came to attack, they wanted to be the ones she hit first. If she tried to sneak around, she couldn't get past David's extraordinary hearing. "She'd better be impatient enough to come for revenge tonight," David said, his voice as cold and precise as the wind. Clark stared out into the dark, scanning with supervision. "According to the forensic inference, Aunt Catherine might have fallen down the stairs and died after hitting the back of her head," he began, then trailed off. He looked back at their parents in the living room. Reluctance showed on his face. "Let me handle Tina when she shows. I'll subdue her." There was an edge in Clark's voice when he promised that, colder even than the night when David had faced Garrick, who died by his hand. David didn't want his brother dragged into bloodshed that would leave their hands stained beyond turning back. "And then," Clark pressed, never tireless in trying to steer David away from irreversible choices. David folded his arms and gave a small, resigned smile. "I've already thought of something." Clark's eyebrow arched with a little triumph. "How do you plan to subdue her without risking them finding out who you are and what you can do?" David blinked in surprise when Clark reached into his pocket and produced a blue knitted hood. He slipped it on, only his eyes showed. "Can you still tell it's me, David?" Clark asked, lowering his voice to a deep, mock menace. "A robber off to hit a bank?" David's mouth twitched. The son of Krypton had finally thought to hide his face, though the image of Clark in a hood looked comically like a bank robber. "I got the idea from the comics," Clark said seriously when David laughed. Clark explained his plan. He could not stop people like Jarek from trying to expose him, but he could make sure anyone who saw him thought an unknown assailant had subdued them. "So don't make a move later," Clark warned. "We can't let Mom and Dad discover anything unusual about you." Rustling came from the path. A slender, black-haired figure approached, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes red as if she'd been crying. She hesitated on the porch, looking small and ashamed. "Clark? David, why are you standing outside?" she asked. "Lana?" Clark's voice was stunned. His hand rubbed the hood as if feeling for the face beneath. "Wait, how did you know me?" "You're wearing the hood, but your clothes, your height, and you're standing next to David." He grinned despite himself. In the cold light, Lana's eyes shone wetly. Her voice was raw. "Aunt thinks I should give Whitney another chance. I got into a fight with my aunt and have nowhere to go. Can I sit inside for a bit?" Clark's expression softened. David, however, elbowed him sharply. Did you forget something, Clark? Clark's hand stopped mid-step. He'd almost opened the door. The possibility stung. Something wasn't right. He switched on supervision. Stop, Clark ordered quietly, reaching out. Under his sight, the figure wavered. Instead of warm flesh, Clark saw an unnatural green skeleton beneath the disguise. The illusion wasn't perfect. He stepped forward, voice hard. Don't try to fool me. You're not Lana. The woman's face twisted in confusion and hurt. What are you saying? If I'm not Lana, then who am I? David's eyes went cold. The steel in his stance told Clark what he already knew. Tina, David said. It's not too late. Turn yourself in. For a moment, seeing the tear-streaked, pleading face of the girl who looked like Lana almost made Clark hesitate. He bit his lip and forced clarity back into place. Inside, Jonathan had picked up his shotgun and shielded Martha with a protective, fatherly posture. The woman's expression hardened. You ruined my life, she hissed, voice cutting like a blade. I wanted the people closest to you to die one by one, dying in shock, confusion, and pain. Her identity exposed, the illusion fell away. Flesh and bone shifted. The girl on the porch reverted to Tina's true form. Her pupils narrowed to cold slits. She looked at David and Clark, and at their parents inside, with a smile that had no warmth. How did you recognize me? She demanded. You might have thought disguises made you invisible, Clark said, but you can't hide everything from us. Was Aunt Catherine's death an accident, or did you kill her? Clark pressed. He made no direct answer. Instead, he stepped forward, a warning in his stance. You've lost a lot of your fun now that we see you, he said quietly. But it doesn't mean I won't stop you, starting with you, Martha. At the mention of her mother, Tina's gaze snapped to Martha. Rage twisted her features. With a sudden movement, she launched herself at the house, aiming to break through and reach Martha. David, Clark, what's wrong with you? David, Clark, what's wrong with you? Swish. In Tina's eyes, the shotgun in Jonathan's hands was no more threatening than a fire poker. The moment she moved, clumps of grass scattered and the whole world seemed to slow. Clark darted forward with the speed of a trained athlete, scooped Tina up, slung her across his waist, and ran. He had seen how slow she had seemed and thought he could restrain her, but a single kick that cracked the pavement told him her strength was far from ordinary. She'd already smashed the yard fence to splinters with little effort. Clark did not want any surprises. After Clark and Tina disappeared from the yard, David, moving like any fit young man, took off after them, picking a direction and chasing hard. I'll go help Clark. Father, you protect Mother, David called over his shoulder. David, don't go, Jonathan shouted, raising the shotgun, but his son was already a few yards ahead and disappearing into the street. David glanced back to make sure his parents were safe, then his speed doubled. Under the streetlights of the suburban road, Clark slowed to set Tina down. Her vision swam. Reflexively, she clasped her hands and drove them into Clark's back. There was a dull, sickening thud. Clark, hit like a truck, was knocked off balance and slammed into the pavement. The asphalt cracked beneath him and pebbles skittered away. You have powers too, Clark, Tina hissed. When she grabbed Clark by the throat, intent on lifting him, Clark gripped her wrist and held on, his face set. Tina, before you make a bigger mistake, you can still walk away. He had felt her anger. Aunt Catherine's death might have been circumspect, not Tina's doing. If so, she hadn't yet killed anyone. At worst, she'd robbed a bank. Mistake? Tina sneered. I'm using what I have to get what I want. What mistake is that? She surged forward to test who was stronger. A fist like lightning suddenly struck her face, and a blast of air followed. Tina skidded backward, slammed across the pavement like a pebble thrown into a lake, bounced several times and landed dozens of meters away. Clark, who had been holding her, rode the shock and was thrown several meters before hitting the ground. Who? Tina spat, touching the welt on her cheek. She pushed herself up and glared at the new arrival. David stood under the streetlight, his face stony, knuckles still rubbing from the blow. Your bones are dense, he said flatly. The punch had hit her cheekbone like a high-density alloy. Tina squinted, recognition flickering, then fury twisted her features. The older brother's got powers. The younger brother's a freak, she spat. And your family shouldn't have messed with me. Like a hunting cat, she lunged. Dozens of meters in a blink, fist whistling toward David. From Tina, astonishment 0.4, anger 6. The punch hit like a bullet. David dodged one strike, grabbed her wrist on the next. She struggled like an animal in iron tongs. Strong, he said, cold, but your technique is all instinct, no training. His grip tightened. The pressure was immense. Let go, Tina screamed, and her free fist sliced through the air toward David's head. He didn't move. Instead, he tightened his hold. The force he showed then was obscene, over 1,000 tons of pressure, enough to crush steel into slag. Crack! A howl of pain cut the night. Mid-swing, Tina's wrist snapped back as if struck by lightning. She screamed and dropped her hand. She clawed at David's fingers, but could not pry them apart. Looking at his face, handsome, cold, utterly merciless, fear flickered into something deeper. David, she stammered. In desperation, she warped her features, contorting her face until it became an uncanny imitation. The lines at the corners of the eyes, the particular way the mouth trembled, Martha's face in pain. She thought seeing his mother's agonized expression would make him relent. For a moment it worked. David's hand loosened as if shocked. How dare you? Then his anger swelled. Before she could move, steel took her skull. David seized her head like a block of iron and slammed her face into the pavement. Gravel exploded around them. Tina's cheek and forehead were driven hard into the stones. Crack! 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 She screamed, tried to lift her head, but the pressure held it down. Panic clawed through her as she muffled cries into the grit. David was unmoved. He raised his fist to bring it down. Let go, David! Clark's voice tore through the night as he grabbed David's wrist and tried to wrench him back. He poured everything he had into the pull, but David barely budged. Clark stared at him, stunned, and went to both hands. Move away! David swung his arm back, as if shrugging off a fly. Clark flew backward as if weightless and hit the pavement. David's fist came down. Bang! Tina's arms went slack like a drowning person's. Her face was buried in dirt. For a terrified instant, there was no movement. Tina! Clark shouted and scrambled to her side, flipping her over. She was still breathing, but she could not be roused. You've turned someone into a vegetable again, Clark snapped, fury and disbelief mingling in his voice. You even copied Mom's face. If I'd wanted, you'd be dead. David rose, clapped once, and looked down at the crumpled woman at his feet with a cool detachment. From Tina, fear 0.8, doubt plus 0.3, anxiety plus 1.0, terror 1.2. She came through a nightmare sequence in seconds, fainting, realizing she was conscious but paralyzed, trying frantically to move and failing, then the slow burn of dread until terror took over. He hadn't killed her. He didn't need to. In the worst prisons, the punishment for uncontrollable inmates was solitary confinement, a narrow, lightless cell where you couldn't take 2 steps, nothing to talk to, not even the sight of your own hands. 3 days there, and even the meanest criminals came out subdued. What he had in mind for Tina would be a drawn-out, bespoke version of that, a long, intensified isolation that would break someone in ways death might not. By the cold lakeside cars were parked along the shore, and small bonfires burned. It should have been a bright holiday barbecue. Instead, the heat and smoke blurred the edges of an awkward scene. David, Chloe, and a few others sat near the flames, tending skewers and grilling meat. David, Clark, what's wrong with you two? Chloe, bundled in a down jacket, asked, puzzled. You haven't spoken to each other in days, have you? Pietro pretended to shiver, rubbing his arms and chattering his teeth in exaggerated fashion. The atmosphere between you two has been as cold as this lake, he joked, trying to break the tension. Oh my God, someone save me! He made broad, comedic gestures, nudging for reconciliation. Clark replied without looking up from the grill, his voice muffled. I'm not cold. David took a sip from a cold fruit beer and stared toward the distant water, as if he hadn't even heard. Chloe's curiosity only grew. She'd never seen the two brothers like this and wondered what had happened between them. Chapter 27, a strange new transfer student template, Fusion, 93%. It was still spring, and even by the cold river, the group of high schoolers couldn't hide their excitement for a holiday barbecue. David took a sip of his fruit beer and stared at the icy water. A few days earlier, after he had put Tina into a coma, the two of them had returned home. Their father, Jonathan, had stood at the doorway with a shotgun in his hands, eyes wild with worry, until he saw both sons come back safe. Only then did he let out a long, shaky breath. He scolded David, demanding to know why he'd chased after her. To stop their parents from worrying further, Clark had stepped in and said he knocked the girl out and left her in front of the town police station. Later, the police found $100,000 in Tina's school locker. But because there wasn't enough evidence and Tina remained inexplicably comatose, she was being treated as a suspect from her hospital bed. Clark had been unusually angry with David after that. He hadn't spoken to him for days. David felt guilty that Clark had taken the blame again, but didn't think it was the end of the world. The son of Krypton, who now swears he'll never cross that line, will someday snap the neck of his last remaining kin, he thought quietly. Clark wasn't truly stubborn or unbending. He was just young enough to idealize everything in the world. Physically, David flexed his hand by the bonfire. His muscles tightened like woven alloy, and a volcanic surge of power coursed through him. The Thanos template had given him enormous strength. Still not enough, he muttered. Even a fully powered Superman had faced life-or-death dangers again and again in this world. Earth had skirted destruction countless times, and on occasion truly perished. David had fused with the Thanos template, but he hadn't developed any grand ambition to rule the universe or take responsibility for it. He had a single, selfish goal: keep getting stronger so he could protect himself and his family, no matter what. Simple to state, complicated to achieve. He wouldn't miss any chance to earn emotional points. I hope the next template is strong, nothing weaker than Thanos, he thought. Because recent events were stirring emotions that hadn't been available before, and with Clark's strength growing as he matured, the emotional point gains had increased. Template fusion was happening fast. The next template couldn't be far off. Expectation flickered in David's eyes. It'd be great if it grants powers that don't rely on my body. If the next template gave him non-physical abilities, he wouldn't have to hide things from his parents and make them worry the way they had over Tina. A ripple of commotion broke David's thoughts. A striking girl glided into the party like pale moonlight spilling into the night, vital, composed, and immediately the center of attention. Every other figure seemed to dim. All the boys followed her with hungry eyes. Clutching steak skewers, they swarmed her like bees to a blossom, vying to invite her to sit with them. A few nearly came to blows. The girl declined politely but firmly. The four of them turned to look. "Who is that? She looks like Lana," Clark asked, puzzled. He didn't remember her at all. David glanced at the newcomer and said flatly, "She does look similar." "I don't see it," Chloe said, a little awkwardly. "Except for the dark hair, their faces and manner are almost nothing alike." Pietro, staring as if transfixed, supplied the answer. "She's a transfer student, Kira, new to our high school." Kira, tall, with sun-kissed skin and black hair tied in a braid, moved with a confident grace. Her mixed heritage showed in her striking features. She wore indigenous ornaments around her neck that gave her a primal, vibrant presence. Pietro brightened. "Maybe my youth officially begins today. Judging from her aura, like some female jungle explorer, she probably won't like a man who's a head shorter than her," he added. Chloe sat on the fringe of the party, unnoticed by the boys, and felt a little deflated watching Kira command everyone's attention. Pietro, mortified that his most fatal flaw had been exposed, turned red and muttered that he was just a late bloomer. For a second it seemed like Kira glanced their way. "Look, she's looking at us," Pietro whispered, scrambling to sit straighter. He adopted an affected, man-with-a-story expression while he flipped his meat, hoping to attract her. But when he glanced back, Kira had already joined a group of girls, laughing and starting their own barbecue as if they didn't exist. His bravado deflated like a punctured balloon. David watched her more closely and felt the faint ping of the template sensors in his mind. Curiosity plus 0.4, doubt to a 0.03, friendliness plus 0.2, vigilance 0.2. "A metahuman?" he murmured. In a town like theirs, it wasn't impossible, but the way her emotions shifted from friendliness to vigilance was odd, almost contradictory, and it made him uneasy. Clark, on the other hand, wasn't looking at Kira. He kept his gaze on Lana and Whitney across the rocks. Whitney was lounging close to Lana while she concentrated on grilling. He jabbered at her between flips. Lana answered in short, infrequent phrases, a faint sadness undercutting her expression. The fact that exes could still sit together and talk meant something. Clark hadn't been as furious at David as he pretended. If he had truly been as angry as his sulk suggested, he wouldn't have teased David and Chloe that it wasn't cold at all, just to be petty. Clark flipped a strip of beef absent-mindedly and glanced at David. His annoyance about Tina's condition was complicated. At first, he had been angry at David for chasing Tina, but he'd also felt a darker anger when Tina had taken on the appearance of their mother, Martha. Remembering that Tina had tried to kill their mother made it hard for him to feel much sympathy. More than anything, Clark worried about his brother and about himself. If he failed to pull David back when it mattered, would he be the one changed instead? Would he grow used to the kind of ruthless decisions David had shown? "Clark, don't just stand there." Pietro nudged him and winked. "Whitney's trying to win Lana back. Are you just going to sit here like a coward?" Clark stammered. He was shy by nature. He couldn't imagine competing with Whitney while he was around. Pietro shook his head quietly. "Lana's been volunteering at the town's elderly care home for the past 2 weeks," David said suddenly. "Tomorrow's the weekend," Pietro added, "and Whitney has football practice." David glanced at Clark. "Have you finished your 30 hours of community service?" Clark's eyes widened. It was a school requirement, 30 hours of community service each semester to build a sense of giving back. The gears turned in his head. This was an opening. Thanks, David," he said, embarrassed and grateful. His older brother's habit of taking the blame had made him quick to sacrifice. "No problem," David said easily, sipping his beer. "You've taken the fall for me twice already. You're being a good big brother. Can't have all the sacrifices be one-sided." Chloe looked between them, curious. "What blame?" she asked. To Chloe's question, Clark answered vaguely and brushed it off. "Perfect. We can go together." Pietro suggested they all go as a group, then shrugged. "Too bad it's not summer, otherwise we could be lifeguards at the pool." He sounded relieved at the thought, anything to avoid being around old people with dentures. Since spring hadn't fully warmed up yet, indoor volunteer work seemed better than picking up trash or cleaning streets. Chloe had already finished her required community service hours and declined. "She's not just watching me, she's watching Clark too." David watched them for a moment. Kira was chatting and barbecuing with a few girls nearby, but her gaze kept drifting over to their side. He and Clark had noticed the same thing. "What's her angle?" he wondered. "Chloe, you look freezing. Want me to warm you up?" A member of the football team called over. He had short, thick, golden hair and still wore his uniform. He flashed a practiced smile and tried to flirt. "I can't believe you said something like that so easily," he added with a wink. Caught off guard and embarrassed, Chloe flushed. "Don't get the wrong idea. I have a blanket. Want to sit with me?" she offered, trying to save face. "Sean, you're not her type," Pietro snapped, suddenly standing. He was a head shorter than Sean, but met him without flinching. David knew Sean's reputation. Glib, a smooth talker who charmed girls then dumped them. A scoundrel, pure and simple. "For biology, I had to do an experiment with Jane from the other class," Sean said airily. Chloe, who wrote for the school paper, had heard the rumor. She chuckled. "I heard you dumped her last week." "To be precise, it was mutual," Sean said, unbothered. Seeing Chloe smile, his confidence swelled. "Come sit with me. I promise I won't do anything. I mean it." His tone softened. His look was calculated to melt anyone. Chloe felt her cheeks warm. Compliments like that didn't come often. She stole a glance at Pietro, remembering he'd teased her about being jealous of Kira, and opened her mouth to reply. "Chloe, you haven't had a single drink. You're just warming up by the fire. Don't pretend you're lightheaded," David interrupted sharply. Teenagers made stupid choices when impulsive. "Stay away." He fixed Sean with a look and said the words like a warning. Sean's eyes darted away. He'd heard how David had handled Whitney and a few other troublemakers before. He raised his hands in surrender. Okay. With his flirting cut off, Sean sulked and wandered off to play football near the lake with friends who were calling him. "Actually, I only wanted to give him my number to get him to go away," Chloe confessed to her friends, trying to appear unfazed. David shrugged. "Let's just pretend you're telling the truth." Chloe felt foolish but grateful. She thanked David and Pietro. She knew they had had her back. Clark watched silently, lost in thought. If anyone threatened his family, he could be a storm of retribution. For his friends, he was the gentle breeze. Was his younger brother really starting to put himself above others? Being ruthless to enemies, was that wrong? He shook his head, forcing the thought away. David studied Clark with concern. One moment Clark was absent, the next he shook his head like someone ridding himself of a bad idea. By the lake, someone shouted, "The pizza we ordered is here! Sean, catch!" someone called, and a football arced through the air. Sean leapt for it, but the ball skimmed his hands and landed on the ice about 20 feet out. Irritated, Sean jogged after it. On the cold, hard ice, he reached down to retrieve the ball when the surface suddenly cracked with a sharp, splitting sound. Crack, crack. It felt like plunging into icy water. Sean looked down. Fissures spidered out from beneath his feet. He tried to back away, panic rising. Help! The ice gave way. He plunged into the frigid lake. He thrashed, trying to find the hole to pull himself out, but the broken edges were too sharp and the water too cold. He slipped under the surface, and after a futile few seconds of struggle, his movements slowed and then stopped. Sean sank into the muddy lake bed. Among the silt, something dimly green glowed near a cluster of rocks. Meteorites clustered together was how it looked. As his body settled on them, his veins darkened and swelled with an eerie green tint. A strange transformation was beginning, silent and unexpected. Back on shore, the other players were digging into steaming pizza, joking and oblivious to their missing teammate. Early the next morning, Martha and Jonathan sat together with a calculator, frowning as they tallied the farm's last 6 months. Distributor takes 12.5%, feed costs over 6 months are 5%, plus 8.2% for the mortgage, and repairs to the mulcher. $54,501, Jonathan concluded. Clark, listening for a moment, arrived at the number before the calculator finished. He scratched an awkward hand across his face. If I hadn't stuck my hand in the mulcher that day, we'd have saved thousands on repairs. Now the income, Jonathan said, not scolding their eldest but taking the ledger gently. David was already glancing at the remaining sheets and interrupted. Income is $67,357. So the farm made over $10,000 in half a year, Clark thought. Impressed. Martha and Jonathan put down the ledger and breathed out. Martha smiled at her 2 capable sons. At least we didn't lose money, and the most precious thing in this family is you two. These are things you shouldn't have to worry about. Didn't you and Pietro arrange to do volunteer work? Go on, hurry up, Jonathan said, waving them off. The burdens of the farm shouldn't fall on students. They arrived at the town nursing home and were assigned their duties over the intercom. Room 206 needs an attendant. Please report to room 206. Every student had to complete 30 hours of community service. The 3 of them reported in and received their assignments. A dark-haired girl in a magenta tunic pushed a cart stacked with books and turned out of a room. Hi, Lana. What a coincidence, you're here too. Clark waved, forcing casualness into his tone. You're volunteering here too? For a while, Lana replied with a small, composed smile. What were you assigned? I've got to keep Cassandra company and read to her. David and Pietro stayed quiet, giving Clark a chance to speak. David's task was to play international chess with an elderly woman. She can be interesting, Lana said with a hint of amusement. The caregivers say she can foresee the future, anything from what will happen in a few minutes to big things in a person's life. Have you tried it? Clark asked. Lana shrugged. She didn't sound like a believer. No, she said, then pushed her cart away. Inside room 206, an old woman with white hair and dark glasses was reading a Braille book by running her fingers over the pages. Don't just stand at the door. It's the first time 3 people have come to read with me. Please come in. Clark and his brothers exchanged glances. David noticed something flicker across Cassandra's face, like an unread notification. Joy from Cassandra +1, +1.2. The old woman was definitely an ability user. Her power didn't seem weak. He still didn't know whether it was true precognition. How did you know there were 3 of us? Pietro asked as they walked in. My eyes may be blind, but my ears are not, Cassandra said in a weathered voice. She took off her glasses and the braille book slipped to the floor. Pietro bent to pick it up and in the movement accidentally touched her hand. "What is your name, sir?" She named him before he answered. "Pietro Ross." "Mr. Ross, your trip home today will be long. Check your pockets," she told him with a faint, mysterious smile. Pietro fished in his pockets and cursed softly. His car keys were gone. He looked at Cassandra with surprise, a flash of resignation crossing his face. "I have to go. Guess I won't be able to do my volunteer shift today. You two take care." After Pietro left, Cassandra rose from her chair. She didn't seem blind at all as she turned to face them and peered directly at the brothers. "Are you two brothers?" she asked. "What are your names, gentlemen?" "The update is a bit late. I wrote an extra 1,000 words. Please keep reading." 29. Live an honest life from now on, Luther. Under the bright sun, the lakeshore near the forest was a mess after last night's party. Suddenly a hand punched through the thick ice, breaking the surface like a zombie claw from a nightmare. The skin was blue as ice, like a corpse frozen in a blizzard. A figure hauled himself from the lake and staggered to the bank, dripping and shaking. The obvious state of someone who'd been in icy water, except he had spent the entire night submerged. Sean, icicles on his lashes, sat down and fumbled for a discarded lighter to start a fire. He held his frozen hands out to the small flame, but the heat was drawn away into the air as if into a vacuum. The newly lit kindling froze into a lump of ice. The numbing cold eased, the blue drained from his skin, and his mind, sluggish and half-frozen, began to clear. He stared at his hands as if he'd been reborn. Something incredible had happened to him. He felt stronger, alarmingly powerful. He clenched and unclenched his fists, testing raw strength he hadn't had before. He got on his feet and tried to go home, but as soon as he left the trees, the bite of the cold returned. Icicles reformed on his brows. He flagged down a passing car. The driver stopped and hurried out to help, but when he reached Sean, his face went slack. The warmth in the man's body was sucked away like a receding tide. Flesh and muscle locked into a pale statue. The man collapsed onto the road and shattered into a spray of bloody ice fragments. As the heat left the stranger, Sean's own cold abated further, and his strength surged. He lifted the car as if it were made of cardboard. He glanced toward the town with the hungry, feverish look of a prospector who's just glimpsed a seam of gold. There it was, on the horizon, the thermal power station, crackling. Thick wool curtains kept the sun from the room. A small fire burned in the hearth. Luther sipped whiskey that scorched his throat and scrolled through old news articles and forum posts on his computer, as he always did while working. Stacks of US dollars lay on a nearby table. The door opened. A middle-aged man in a trench coat stepped in, hair thinning at the temples and eyes sharp with practiced cunning. He tapped a brown paper file against his thigh. "Mr. Luther, the money I asked for, is it ready?" "Roger Nixon, if I'm not mistaken." Luther rose slowly, poured a glass of whiskey, and handed it over with a smile. "A reporter from the Metropolis Inquiry. You said you had something to show me." "This photo made our sales skyrocket." Nixon pulled a newspaper from the folder. The front page showed Lex Luthor at a bank doorway, a pistol in hand, a snapshot of a robbery from the past. "That's in the past," Luther said with a bored chuckle. "I imagine a reporter like yourself would know about the latest developments in that case. News gets old fast. It's hard to stay on top." Nixon shook his head. "Mr. Luther, have you ever dug for potatoes?" Luther stared. Nixon smiled as if he'd made a point. "You see, when you dig for potatoes, you usually pull up more than one." He thumped the file and slid it across the desk. "This is thick. Juvenile records, juvenile arrests. All of them. It's surprising what people thought were long-buried archives actually contain." Luther took the file, flipped through, and a slow smile spread over his face. "Thank you, Mr. Nixon." "Thank you?" Nixon blinked. "Thankful for blackmail? These are supposed to be destroyed electronic records and sealed files. How did you find them?" Nixon eased himself into the chair behind the desk and folded his hands. "I imagine your father spent a lot to bury these. I'm not as rich as him, but a little payoff to an archive custodian goes a long way." He smirked. "Imagine what publishing this would do. The newly vindicated heir turns out to have a checkered youth. A bank robbery photo like that would ruin a name." "It sells papers," Luther agreed. He glanced at the crisp, ink-scented bundles of bills on the table. Nixon continued smoothly. It'll affect the Luther Group's stock. People love a twist. Luther reached under the desk and produced a small black cloth bag. The money is yours. Nixon looked surprised and eased the stacks into the bag. You really put it all here yourself. He straightened, relieved and smug as he pocketed the cash. You must be feeling good. It does feel good to have beaten the famous Luther, father and son, Luther said calmly. He slid the file back toward Nixon. This is the only copy. Live an honest life from now on, Lex Luthor. Nixon's face hardened. He wasn't intimidated by a billionaire heir. If you walk out that door right now, he said, leaning forward, I guarantee you'll evaporate from this world. Luther set his glass down, smile never leaving his lips, but the air around it cold. What are you going to do? Kill me over 100,000? To blackmail a billionaire heir, Nixon shot back, contempt in his voice. Did you think I wouldn't be prepared? If I don't get back in time, an automatic email goes out to every paper on my list. Is that little sum worth your life? No, Luther said softly. You'll live well, but there will be no evidence that you ever existed. He sounded casual, like discussing the weather. Driver's license, passport, bank accounts, tax records, gone. One call, and there'll be no proof that you lived. Nixon scoffed. You're trying to scare me. Call the bank. See if your account still exists. Luther's eyes were steady. Nixon fumbled for his phone, thumbed at it, and then tried to dial out, but the calls wouldn't connect. He pressed again and again. Nothing. Cold sweat beaded his forehead. His voice rose into a high panic. How did you do that? Don't worry, Mr. Jack. In the manor office, Mr. Luther leaned forward, fingers interlaced, a grin like a crocodile baring its teeth. A wonderful new life awaits you. My name is Nixon, he managed. That's in the past. I'll give you a new identity. Your surname will be Jack. What should your first name be? Baker? Benson? Johnson? Mr. Luther rattled off names as if choosing a sandwich for lunch, casually weaving the shape of Nixon's future. Nixon felt the floor drop out from beneath him. A cold sweat ran down his spine. What profession? Assassin, drug dealer, gang enforcer, or terrorist? Luther's voice was flat, cataloging options that all ended in arrest or exile. Each choice would force Nixon into a life on the run, stained by murder charges. He swallowed, and in a desperate bid to buy back some of his old life, slid the money bag across the table. You can have the money back, he said, his hands trembling as he stacked the bills back into the bag. Family, work, friends, all the things he'd built in the first half of his life. Could he really watch them be taken away? He wiped cold sweat from his brow and forced a strained smile at the man who held the power to decide his fate. Mr. Luther, you think you can blackmail me? Luther's brow rose, lips twisting. You think I'm some rich kid who needs his father's protection? He rose slowly, deliberately, his posture like a vengeful spirit ready to devour someone. His voice climbed into a roar that made Nixon's knees go weak. You're not the first to try that, and those I make disappear don't come back. What kind of people do you think run this country? Mr. Luther, what do you want from me? Nixon's voice shook. He felt as if a monstrous wave could crash down at any moment and crush him. Please, just tell me. You're a well-connected reporter in Metropolis, Luther said, his voice colder now. Your channels into the lower strata are even better than mine. I want you to investigate something for me quietly. You, tell me. There's a family in this town named Kent. They run a farm. Mr. Luther pulled back the curtains. Sunlight flooded the room but could not reach the chill in his eyes. I want everything on them, every piece of information, no matter how small. I will, Nixon said quickly, eager to prove himself. And what, Mr. Luther? He lowered his head like a servile man caught in a storm. This town, Luther said, looking out the window at the estate beyond, is a curious place. He smiled as if recalling a private pleasure. I've only been here a few days, but I've already glimpsed its veil. I'm entranced. He listed examples with casual menace. Clark, struck by a sports car at 200 miles an hour and thrown off a bridge yet untouched, someone who even saved his own life. The girl who somehow took on his likeness to rob a bank. The strange rumors that have started to circulate online since the meteorite shower. I want to know everything about its mysteries. You'll get your wish, Mr. Luther. Nixon nodded, swallowing the last of his pride. Luther watched him drive away, like someone setting a trained hound out to hunt. He raised his glass, took a slow sip of wine, and let out a low chuckle. Thank you, Nixon. It's fortunate that someone timid and foolish like you found my loophole instead of a more troublesome fellow. You showed up at the perfect time. What are your names, gentlemen? The old woman asked. In the nursing home, Cassandra, white-haired, eyes clouded with cataracts, smiled with the easy kindness of someone who'd outlived most surprises. I'm Clark. David Kent, the other answered at once. Kent brothers, come closer. The old woman gestured to a bed nearby. Miss Cassandra, I heard you can see the future. They sat. Clark glanced at David. After encountering several ability users, he shared the same mixture of curiosity and caution. He hesitated, then asked, Is it true? Who wouldn't be curious about the future, especially when the glimpses might be real? Cassandra's lips twitched. The first time, I thought it was a curse. As soon as I touched someone, fragments of events would flash before my eyes, uncontrollable, like broken glimpses. She smiled softly. Later, I realized it was a gift, a compensation from heaven. Clark blinked. The old woman didn't hide her ability at all. She spoke of it plainly to strangers. He felt a flicker of doubt. Was she a fraud? A show-off? But what had happened with Pietro earlier convinced him something truly strange was at work. David, calmer, said, Clark, don't think such unkind things. Unlike his brother, David seemed certain she could foresee things. He added, When you reach Miss Cassandra's age, you'll probably view some things with more calm. Looking at her again, Clark did feel something like peaceful water about the woman. Time had smoothed her. He apologized quickly. I'm sorry, Miss Cassandra. It's all right, she said, indifferent to the flutter of embarrassment. When did you first have a premonition? Clark had always suspected the town's strange events began after the meteorite shower. Could ability users be connected to that night? He'd felt it as a premonition, but had no proof. One morning, a meteorite fell and hit the wheat field in front of my house. The doctor said the flash damaged my optic nerves. That brief moment changed my whole life. I'm sorry, he said. The meteorite had come with him. He felt responsible for the disaster that altered so many lives. It's not your fault, child. Cassandra mistook his guilt for sorrow over her blindness and smiled. Kindness is a good thing. David offered gently, Some things in this world are beyond your control, brother. You didn't choose to be brought here. His words lifted some of the burden from Clark's shoulders. He breathed easier, though it felt odd to be reassured over such a small thing. Since then, I can't see the present, only scraps of other people's future, he admitted. Cassandra listened, then reached out her hand in a slow, deliberate motion. Child, would you like to try? Clark hesitated. Would trying her ability drain him? He'd come to volunteer and read to the elderly, not to undergo some supernatural test. Still, hearing her speak of light and memory loosened something in him. Why do you help people see the future, Miss Cassandra? She nodded, pleased. The world is so beautiful. Clouds white as cotton, green fields, a blue sky. Light is always better than darkness, especially for someone who once had sight. Her voice held the nostalgia of someone who remembered color. Comforted, Clark extended his hand to the kind, blind old woman. Thank you, Miss Cassandra. Just then, outside the room, a tall figure with black hair leaned against the wall, eavesdropping like a hunter in the jungle, silent, still, and all attention. 31. The future, Clark sees. Clark reached out and took the old woman's wrinkled hand. For a few seconds, his vision blurred, and then the world seemed to change around him. An apocalyptic scene unfolded. The sky, a bloody sunset hunched over pierced skyscrapers, collapsed houses, and burning fires. Thick black smoke rose in columns. People scattered and fled, their desperate wails cutting through the air like cries from hell. A deep, gouging chasm, like a scar carved by some colossal finger, split the landscape. Clark felt a sudden, crushing pain as if struck by a meteor, and he crumpled at the edge of that gully. His body writhed uncontrollably as he tried to look up. From above, a black-haired man descended, clad in a dark battlesuit patterned with strange gold markings. His frame was lean and powerful. Half a meter from the ground, the gravel around him lifted and spun, orbiting him like satellites. His presence was overwhelming, like a deity stepping down into the human world, and it was hard to breathe. David? Seeing that terrifying tableau, and seeing his brother at once unfamiliar and familiar, Clark was stunned. He felt trapped in a dream, helpless to speak or move, with only a narrow, enforced perspective. "Clark, look around," David said. His eyes glowed with a lava-like red. He shook his head slightly. "I didn't want to do this, but you were too stubborn. You forced my hand." "What do you mean?" Clark whispered. Panic and confusion raced through him. Was all this David's doing? Had David surrendered to power and turned on the world? Thoughts tumbled. Did Clark himself stand against David and provoke this ruin? He squinted into the wreckage and recognized the skyline. Metropolis. The golden globe atop the Daily Planet lay ripped from its pedestal, smashed through buildings, and resting like a shattered weapon in the rubble. A volcanic fury rose in his future self's eyes. "Brother, you need to be corrected," his future self roared. He lunged like a god attacking another god. In an instant, a golden rope, sharp as lightning, snatched around David's waist. At the same time, several green, crystal-like chains wrapped his body like constricting serpents, and huge nails slammed into the ground, pinning the chains. David's forward momentum was halted. He was violently yanked back. The air rolled away from the impact, and only a few dozen centimeters separated them. Their faces were almost touching. David hovered, eyes unblinking. "It's you who need to be fixed, my brother." Clark tried to make sense of who was helping David. His future self turned his head, blazing with anger. On one side, a warrior woman, regal and fierce, stomped forward in armor and a crown, clenching the golden rope. On the other, a brown-haired man in a glowing green bodysuit floated in midair, his usually easy smile gone serious. A ring on his hand glowed as he strained to keep the emerald chains and the nails manifest and intact. Both were at the limits of endurance, teeth gritted, using everything they had just to hold the raging future Clark back. David's accomplices? Clark thought, his heart pounding. Were they on David's side or against him? Before he could decide, David struck. He flashed forward and punched with the force of a meteor. The future Clark slammed into the ground, carving a crater dozens of meters wide. The shockwave rolled through the streets like an earthquake. Buildings shook and windows exploded. A deep voice echoed, "What do we do?" A grappling hook embedded in a nearby wall, and a shadow like a bat swung into view. He spread a black cape as he dropped to the ground, landing in a dark, sealed stance. The figure was brooding and severe, the very image of night, an oppressive presence that made people instinctively flinch. Clark had once doubted whether these future visions could be real, whether David could really turn dark, but now his certainty wavered. The bat-like figure looked nothing like someone who favored the light. "Clark, if our parents saw this, they'd be devastated," David said, frowning and raising his hand as if to strike again. Crack. The vision shattered. Clark's consciousness snapped back to the present. Miss Cassandra's eyes opened. Whatever divination had finished, the reading was over. She looked at David with sudden surprise, an expression that asked a question Clark could not hear. Had she seen David in Clark's future? Had she seen something that shocked her? Clark, suddenly back in the room, stood up with a jolt. A dozen miles away, a massive smokestack at a power plant was encased in frost. Sean pulled his hand back from its icy surface, a look of dazed triumph on his face. Around his feet, a score of factory workers stood frozen, their expressions locked in terror like statues of ice. The stack itself was sheathed in rime, cold and normal, flickered in rapid alternation as his absorption progressed. Each time he drained enough heat, his strength surged another notch. He had been filled, energized beyond what he'd ever known, and then he stopped, satisfied for the moment. He glanced at the dozen dented brass bullets scattered on the ground. When they'd struck him earlier, they hadn't even tickled. He couldn't imagine how strong he must be now. He grabbed a crowbar that a plant patrolman had used as a weapon. With a sound like a hinge cranking, the crowbar bent into a grotesque pretzel under his grip. "Not even the limit," he muttered. He pressed both hands to the warped steel and pushed. The twisted crowbar flowed between his fingers like hot clay. Joy spread across his face. He laughed, half hysterical. In a world built on steel, he felt invincible. The police couldn't stop him. The town would be his playground. What to start with? He thought of going after some pretty girl to show off his steel arms. Then another thought intruded and slammed into him. David. The name snapped him back to yesterday, to how a single look and a word had sent him packing in humiliation. "You think you're so tough?" he snarled aloud to the memory. He remembered being cowed by a small group the day before, and the bitter anger flickered hot in his chest. "I'm not who I used to be." What were a few football players to him now? He alone could take on an army. Leaving a field of lifeless figures behind, Sean clenched his fists and walked out of the plant, heading toward Kent Farm. His face was set, grim. "I swear," he said under his breath, "you'll regret making me feel small, David." 32. People who can't see the future. What's wrong with me? David stared at the two people in the room, both visibly stunned, and then looked at Clark in confusion. "What did you see?" Cassandra might be expected to understand. After all, Clark had never seen the old woman's power before. But why did Clark look so shocked and afraid? "You." Clark hesitated. The struggle was obvious on his face. Should he tell his brother? How would David react if he learned what the future held? A warning flared in his mind. He mustn't become like the dark future he'd glimpsed, mustn't let himself slide into that place. "You saw it too, child?" At Clark's voice, the blind Cassandra turned her head toward him. Her surprise was audible. "I? Shouldn't I have seen it?" "No one has ever seen it before," Clark said, but Cassandra shook her head. When she reached into someone's future, only she would see the vision. She had once had to speak up and tell Mr. Ross where he'd left his car keys after seeing it herself. This time, though, she had done something different. "Why? We all know you're different from everyone else." Clark, mind almost empty from the shock of recent events, suddenly remembered in a rush that his own abilities had been exposed and that his brother was also different. "Don't be afraid, Clark." Cassandra's voice softened, and she smiled as if she had been looking at Clark's face in a future she had seen. "I just realized I've seen you before." "She's seen me before?" Clark was baffled. When this woman had gone blind, Clark had been an infant, arriving on Earth in the meteor shower. David's expression shifted ever so slightly as he tried to guess where Cassandra might have seen him. Cassandra paused, smiled with a hint of mystery, then said, "Child, go close the door." Puzzled, Clark went to the door. At the sound of voices inside, the dark-haired girl who'd been lingering near the wall, Pietro had left the door ajar when he left, moved away. Clark shut the door and returned to the bedside but did not sit down beside his brother. "Why are you looking at me like that, Clark?" David saw the complicated look on Clark's face and wondered what the vision had shown him. He laughed, pretending not to care. Concern from Clark plus 32, panic plus 30, fear 25. He wasn't particularly obsessed with the future. He didn't need others to tell him what his destiny would be. But Clark's reaction made him curious. David tried to guess what Clark might have seen. Clark's current emotions are like an amplified version of his old fears about me going down a dark path? His eyes flickered as he probed possibilities, but still he couldn't understand why his future would be what Clark feared. The dark-haired girl, Kira, peeked back around the corner, looking at the now-closed door with furrowed brows, about to slip away. "Kira?" A clear voice piped up behind her. "What a coincidence. I didn't expect to run into you here." Lana was pushing a cart, surprised to see the friend she'd met at last night's party. "Are you volunteering here too?" Kira turned, a slightly forced smile on her face. Yes. Some things are the same even if you're new. 30 hours of community service per semester." Lana chatted easily, but she soon realized Kira hadn't been this talkative yesterday. They talked, and Kira peppered Lana with questions about the small-town high school and its famous students. Still, her attention kept drifting aside. Inside the room, Cassandra smiled and said, "In some people's futures I see pain and despair, but when you appear, hope arrives, and all disasters fade." David's eyes widened. So the old woman had glimpsed Clark, the future Superman, before, in other people's visions. He had underestimated the woman in this small-town nursing home. If she could perceive the future presence of someone like Clark, perhaps her reach into the world's future was broader than he'd thought. Or maybe she simply caught stray threads of the future now and then. "Me? Extraordinary?" Clark pointed at himself, bewildered. He already knew he was different, but he had never imagined being described like that. Cassandra's voice was gentle and oddly full of meaning. "You seem born for this, child, to help everyone escape fear and darkness. She folded her hands in her lap. After seeing so many futures, I've summarized a rule. Do you know what it is? Please tell me, Clark said earnestly, recovering his composure as only she could. The future can be changed. A small, mysterious smile tugged at Cassandra's lips. In fact, from this moment on, the future is already beginning to change. Just like Pietro, David said quietly. Once someone knows their future, they won't allow themselves, or the world, to move toward a future they hate. Yes, child. Even if Cassandra had seen David in possible futures and thought of him as a threat to Clark, her tone toward him remained kind. She had looked into countless lives. Human beings were complicated. One could not easily define a person or pin down a life. An ordinary child from a farm town might someday become the most beloved person on the planet. A respected prosecutor could, after a single bad day, become something monstrous. A mercenary who valued money above all might, in another set of circumstances, worked tirelessly, with no thought of reward, to save the world. Now, it's your turn, child. Cassandra extended a gnarled hand toward David. He hesitated, then reached out. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Long moments passed, and nothing happened. David began to think he wasn't as special as the son of tomorrow, that she simply wouldn't show him his future. Special Kent brothers. The blind woman opened her milky, cataract-clouded eyes and sighed. Child, I cannot see your future. This was another unprecedented situation. It seems I have nothing to guide you with. She shook her head. Your future must be grasped and made by yourself. 2 brothers, one whose future she could see in others, and the other she could not read at all. Can't see? David was baffled. His Thanos-like physiology gave him extreme resistance to psychic abilities. Was that why she couldn't see his future? Clark, who had been anxious and desperate to glimpse his brother's path, was stunned. He hardened his jaw and vowed inwardly that he would not let David fall into any dark fate. Clark opened his eyes, voice a little unsteady. Madam, could you, please, look at my future again? Cassandra, though blind, was not unseeing at heart. She understood what he wanted and shook her head. Child, I am not a radio you can tune on demand, switching channels whenever you want to see a different part of your future. The update was a bit late, with 400 extra words. Please keep reading. 33. Ignorance leads to the grave. Miss Cassandra's visions of the future were fickle. Sometimes she saw things minutes away. Sometimes she saw the end of a person's life. She could not freeze a future that changed with every breath. Clark had wanted her to look at him again, to test whether his determination to stop his brother from going wrong had actually altered what was to come. It was impossible. I'm tired, children, she said. Miss Cassandra smiled contentedly at the ticking clock. Clark felt a little guilty. He hadn't even started reading to the elderly woman. You don't really need someone to read to you, do you? He asked. David patted his shoulder and stood. The old woman could read Braille. She didn't need their help to read words. What she wanted were glimpses of life, vivid images of the future that others carried with them. Miss Cassandra, I'm sorry to have disturbed you. Clark checked the clock and felt he had stayed long enough. I'll come by this afternoon, he said. Child, I can only show you fragments, Miss Cassandra warned as he reached for the door. Sometimes you don't see the whole picture, so don't judge too quickly. She sat back in her chair and spoke gently, the way an elder gives advice that's cost them something to learn. With family, have more patience and trust. I understand. Thank you, Miss Cassandra. Clark hesitated, thinking on her words, then nodded and closed the door. He had meant to stay longer, maybe sit with Lana in the cafeteria, but the visit had soured his mood. He'd planned to join David downstairs in the chess room to finish their community service. After 2 games the other woman had refused to play on, she'd realized David had been letting her win. They obliged her to 1 serious game, and she was quickly beaten. Playing against someone far out of your league was dull for both players. You 2 go on. Tell the staff I played with you, the woman had said, rubbing her forehead in irritation. They left. With lunch approaching, both of them preferred going home for their mother Martha's seafood chowder rather than eating in the nursing home cafeteria. Downstairs, Pietro's family car sat waiting in the lot, but Pietro himself was nowhere to be seen, probably hunting for his keys. Are you really going home looking like that, Clark? David asked, grinning. What will father and mother think when they see you? Clark's brow stayed clouded as they walked out into the sunlight. He was distracted. David's eyebrow lifted in amusement. What did Miss Cassandra say that has you so worried? Did I lock you in a kryptonite coffin or steal Lana away from you? No, none of that. Even a child wouldn't believe that, David said, laughing. Clark, who had always been terrible at lying in front of his brother, felt the effort pointless. Let me think it over before you go on about it, Clark said. He didn't know whether telling David what he'd been shown would help or harm them, so he wanted time. He lingered and glanced back at the nursing home. He had come that day to spend time with Lana, to talk in the cafeteria, but after what Miss Cassandra had hinted, his mood had gone to pieces. It's your future anyway, he added finally. David shrugged. He wasn't going to let a fortune-teller's fragments rule his life. The future was in his hands. He decided its course. The captain steers his own life's ship. A lot of people in the world claimed precognition. If you let every prediction dictate your days, you'd have no time left for living. There's something else I'm more worried about, David said, clenching his fist as they walked. Since the template fusion had passed 90%, David had felt a powerful energy coursing through him, filling every cell. As the fusion climbed, the force grew, but he couldn't release it. He thought about Thanos from the comics. Thanos could blast cosmic energy from his hands or eyes, but he hadn't started that way. After leaving Titan and becoming a warlord, he killed the leader of a cosmic pirate crew and took his place, plundering technology across the galaxy to modify his body. To unlock his potential, Thanos made armor and underwent biological alterations that let him focus and channel the energy inside him. Movie Thanos had worn a golden armor that looked simple, but hid top-tier tech designed to help channel his power. David had wondered if he should have merged with a Thanos template, if only to make his energy usable. But some essences don't change. Maybe movie Thanos was too obsessed with Infinity Stones to explore his own potential, and even without external beams, his physique alone ruled the cosmos. Besides, even energy projection wouldn't have made a snap any easier. David shook his head. He had neither a cosmic suit nor the means for biological surgery. For now, the extra ability felt useless. What a coincidence, someone said. A voice heavy with resentment and triumph interrupted his thoughts. A figure had stepped out from a crossroads and blocked their path. His skin looked like ice and snow, his lips were purple, and his face had a cold, uncanny pallor. I was passing through town to visit your family's farm, he said, but I didn't expect to run into you. Sean? Clark stopped and stared. The man before them was trembling but wore a bizarre grin. Are you all right? All right? Sean spread his arms and laughed, wild. I've never been better. Then his grin turned hard. Frost crept along his hands and the grass around him froze to rime. Ice and snow swirled in the wind. Kneel and beg, and I might consider sparing you, David. David's mouth tightened. It was obvious from Sean's appearance. Kryptonite radiation had mutated him. You look like you belong in a circus, David said coldly. Sean's features twisted with fury. You laugh now, but your ignorance will lead you to the grave, he spat, and lunged forward. You have no idea what I can do now. Sean, stop! Clark leapt forward, trying to put himself between Sean and David to protect both of them. But the moment his hands touched Sean, heat began to drain from Clark's body in a rush. A sun-like glow flared where their skin met, and the warmth flowed into Sean. How can your body hold more heat than a small power plant? Sean breathed, astonished. With the stolen heat surging into him, his muscles tightened and his form swelled. He widened his eyes. I'm getting stronger. The shadow of fire and white. Ah! A pained whimper escaped Clark as his strength drained away. He collapsed to the ground, his body encased in ice cold enough to shatter steel. Consciousness blurred. He shivered uncontrollably. You're asking for death. David stomped, cracking the asphalt beneath him, and launched forward like a cannon. He appeared before Sean and, with the force of a volcanic eruption, punched him in the chest. Bang! A deafening blast and a visible white shockwave radiated outward like a hurricane, sweeping dozens of meters. Crack! 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 It felt as if a high-speed train had slammed into Sean's chest. He was hurled backward, gouging a long furrow in the ground and burying himself dozens of meters away. Clark, are you all right? David asked, frowning. Under the sun and still breathing, Clark's body should have been fine. I'm fine, Clark managed. In the sunlight, his purplish, frozen face began to thaw, but his body felt weak, as if recovery would take time. Seeing his brother worried for him warmed him. He remembered something then. In the vision he had seen his brother flying, with normal skin tone and glowing red eyes. Was that really his brother? Had Cassandra's gift misfired when used on him, an alien, and given him strange hallucinations? Brother, don't kill him and don't, Clark's teeth chattered. I'll avenge you now. Before he could finish, David stamped the ground again. The impact cracked the hard asphalt and sent him shooting forward in a sweeping arc. He landed in front of Sean, mud and rubble spraying under his feet. Ignorance leads people to the grave, David said coldly, but it won't be my fate. You also got powers? Sean spat, voice tight with pain. He staggered to his feet and lunged, swinging wildly. David barely moved, tilting his head to let the blows miss. Having just watched what had happened to Clark, Sean knew better than to touch him. Clark's solar-derived ability was unique, and contact with most others like him could be lethal. Can you absorb heat to grow stronger? Sean demanded, then charged. David's kick sent him flying. This time, David put even more force behind it. Bones cracked. The blow shattered ribs. Sean crashed into the pit like a stone thrown into a lake, sending earth and debris flying and carving out a several-meter-wide crater. David looked down. That's a good ability, but wasted on you. To absorb the combined body heat of many power users is usually ineffective. Only Clark, whose power comes from the sun, is the exception. For anyone else, a single touch might be fatal. Some people, David continued flatly, no matter how much power you give them, can't hide their cowardice. Shut up, Sean roared, enraged. He leapt from the pit in a charging stance, whipping up a gust of wind, and slammed into David, wrapping his arms around David's waist. Kneel and beg me for mercy. He used his legs to push, activated his heat absorption ability, and expected David to collapse at the first contact. Instead, David braced, planting his feet and digging 2 furrows in the ground. Calmly, he punched Sean down. The force, along with Sean's body, slammed into the earth and sent a white shockwave outward that tore up stones and tossed clumps of grass. Crack! 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 The sickening sound of bones breaking rang out. My back! Sean screamed from the crater, pain shredding through him. His face contorted. He clawed at his back and could no longer feel his lower body. Don't worry, David said expressionlessly. You'll be free of pain soon. He felt the faint drain of universal energy as he struck and, with the force of a falling mountain, drove his fist down. Bang! Sean's eyes rolled back. He passed out. With his brain damaged, he would slip into a vegetative void. A weak Clark stumbled over and watched helplessly as the scene unfolded. Oh, right, Clark. What were you going to say just now? David asked, withdrawing his fist and peering down into the pit. Clark swallowed, rage and helplessness warring within him. Seeing Sean reduced to a shell of a man almost made him faint. Creak. The door opened, and Kira stepped in hesitantly, her black hair framing a nervous face, hands clasped together. Miss Cassandra? She began. Everyone at the nursing home says you can see the future. Please, can you help me? Cassandra sat on a stool, eating slowly, listening to the bright birdsong outside the window. Her eyes were closed as she chewed each bite with deliberate calm, an expression of serene reminiscence on her face, as if savoring both a meal and memories. Child, I am no gypsy witch, she said, opening her eyes and setting down her spoon. If you want to predict the future, I suggest you go to a fortune-teller's tent at the circus, she continued, unhurried. And one more piece of advice. Eavesdropping is a poor habit. Please give me a chance, Miss Cassandra. Kira's eyes lit up at the slimmest hope. She took a step forward, voice quivering with excitement. Even without heightened senses, Kira's agility shouldn't have allowed her to move so quietly near a blind old woman, but she'd done it. Cassandra sighed, a little regret in her voice. As you age, the mind does grow less flexible. Time is running out. Could you just let me have a little time? Kira begged. Time is running out? Cassandra glanced at the clock on the wall. The minute hand hovered near the hour. A faint smile touched her lips. I saw my own death in the other caregivers' futures. Some futures can be changed. Others, like the natural end of life, are fixed. Nearly 90, she had planned to slip away quietly this morning after one last look at the world. Death, she believed, should be peaceful. By rights, Kira shouldn't have disturbed her final moments. The girl bowed her head, guilt softening her features. "This isn't just important to me," Kira said. "It matters to my tribe, and even the world. Please. I cannot reveal another's future without their permission." Cassandra's voice was gentle but firm. Kira's plea made the old woman relent. She set her spoon down, closed her eyes for a moment, then took a breath. "I can, however, look at your future." "My future?" Kira asked, torn. If Nama truly appeared in this generation as prophesied, if, according to her tribe's legends, she would become entangled with Nama, who would descend with heavenly fire and make her his woman, then seeing her future might reveal which brother was Nama and which was the evil Segai. With that knowledge, she could help the true savior defeat his brother. "Thank you, miss." Kira's relief showed on her face. Cassandra gave a small, weary smile. "This world is beautiful. It's not a bad thing to take one last look before leaving." With effort and the girl's help, she lay back on the bed, took Kira's hand, and closed her eyes. After a moment, after a vision, she opened them weakly, pity softening her features as she turned to the anxious girl. "No, do not go near those brothers," she whispered. "If you approach them, your fate will be grim." "Grim?" Kira echoed, heart pounding. "And your tribe." Cassandra's voice faltered, the sentence cutting off. As the minute hand slipped past the hour, Cassandra's strength ebbed. She had spoken only half a sentence when she lost the last of her energy. Her hand fell limp. "Miss?" Kira's face drained of color. I wrote a few hundred more words. Please continue reading. The protagonist's second template is coming soon and will complement the first. I will update earlier in the future. David showed no mercy. Sean, who had tried to attack him and even shouted that he wanted to kill him, was left a vegetable. Clark, furious for his brother, lunged forward, shoved Sean away and pulled himself free, feeling a painful warmth in his chest. He couldn't help but be angry. Standing over the unconscious Sean at the bottom of the pit, his voice was heavy and uncertain. "This is different from before. Sean might not even have committed a crime, and you've already turned him into a vegetable. The previous metahumans, Jerome, who could generate electricity, Garrick, who took on insectoid forms, and Tina, who could reshape flesh and strengthen bones, had all been confirmed murderers. Sean was different. Maybe he'd only just discovered his abilities and come after David in a blind rage. "Isn't attacking you and me a crime?" Clark pressed. David feigned surprise. "His powers are dangerous. Setting everything else aside, shouldn't this count as self-defense in court?" He clapped Clark on the shoulder, who stood momentarily stunned, and began to walk away. "Don't worry, brother. Aliens are people too." Clark fell silent. He wasn't surprised. David spoke the same way the comics did, unable to see himself as a person who could be guilty, as if a superhuman committing violence were somehow less culpable than a regular person wielding a weapon. If Sean had done nothing but attack him, David wouldn't have cared much. Now David was applying that same logic to others. Is power a crime? Are metahumans not people? Since things had gone this far, Clark thought for a moment, gritted his teeth, and with super speed erased the surrounding traces. He carried Sean to the hospital entrance and then caught up with his brother. The first time David had acted like this, Clark had been shocked and incredulous. Now he was terrifyingly used to it. At home, though, he tried not to show his anger. At dinner, he heard on the radio that the town's thermal power plant had been attacked by an unknown assailant, suspected use of liquid nitrogen, and more than a dozen people had frozen to death. Clark knew the chain of events that had led there. David had helped Chloe drive Sean away the day before. Jonathan and Martha worried aloud at the table. Maybe it was another metahuman, they said, and perhaps the police could bring the culprit to justice. They didn't know the actual culprit was the man now lying comatose in the hospital. Thinking it over, Clark judged that David's outlook, placing himself above life and law, was dangerous, but maybe not as reckless as someone like Sean, who immediately set himself above everything once he gained power. Clark still believed his brother needed correction. It would be best if David didn't just turn people into vegetables at the drop of a hat, he told himself. He stopped trying to change David with words. He had finally accepted that his brother had his own code for dealing with the world. Most of the time, David was cleverer and more composed than he was. Clark's words probably meant little to him. "I've said enough. Saying more won't help," he thought. Sometimes words are powerless. Whether Miss Cassandra's vision had been right or wrong, Clark could not let David go down a darker path. It was his duty as an older brother to stop him. "This time I was careless," Clark admitted to himself. He resolved that next time he would stop David with action. He refused to be in the position of being embarrassed and needing his younger brother to fix things again. That evening, they went into Metropolis for a special antique exhibit at the City Museum. Visitors in suits and dresses sipped complimentary champagne and admired rare objects from around the globe. In front of an ancient Greek breastplate in a glass case, Clark lingered, mood still heavy from the day's events. By the time we went back to the nursing home 2 hours later, Miss Cassandra had already passed away. He was grateful to the old woman for trying to show him the future. He had planned to spend more time with her that afternoon, but when he returned, the room was empty. All her belongings had been packed away. A caregiver with reddened eyes told him the woman had died at noon. Many residents had been helped by Cassandra. She'd guided them and resolved their troubles. They'd been sorrowful at her loss. "At least she didn't leave the world in pain," David said gently. The kind old woman had probably seen her own death coming and slipped away peacefully. "No need to mourn someone who saw through life," he added. That afternoon, they'd run into Lana, who had just returned from Metropolis. Her aunt had given her a few tickets to the exhibition, and since Lana remembered the trouble she caused and how Clark comforted her, she handed them both a ticket. Clark had been glad for the chance to spend time with her in the evening, even if he still mulled over the day's events. He forced a breath and lifted his gaze to the armor, encrusted with large blue and red gems. It looked magnificent and obviously ceremonial, far too ostentatious for battle. "Are some museum pieces actually high-quality replicas to prevent accidents?" he asked quietly, still not entirely comfortable in this setting after a farm upbringing. "You can look deeper with your own eyes," David replied casually. David, for his part, had half been ignoring his emotional notifications lately, hiding the alerts. The Thanos template he'd been integrating was nearly fully merged. He hadn't been paying attention to the small emotion pings, and yet spiteful messages from several people he'd turned into vegetables kept flooding in and were annoying. Still, he noticed the emotional points ticking upward. From Clark's resolve came a healthy surge. Clark's strength, David observed, had increased very quickly in recent days. The ability points Clark had contributed over the past few days had almost doubled. Even faint emotions yielded noticeable points. He even caught a tiny blip. Kara's nervousness registered, though he couldn't remember when he'd encountered her. "Clark, David, what a surprise to run into you here." A slim figure in a black suit approached, a champagne glass with a lemon slice at the rim in his hand. Lex Luthor smiled, offering the sort of practiced charm he always wore. "Would you like me to introduce you to the exhibits?" "Lex." Clark smiled back. Lex pointed at the snake-like pattern on the breastplate's chest. "A genuine ancient Greek artifact, once belonging to Alexander the Great," he said. "This pattern, some say it represents courage and strength." "Courage and strength?" David looked up and let out a short laugh. The coiled snake resembled an S. Inlaid gems sparkled from a distance. "Alexander's soldiers probably wouldn't agree. I can't imagine anyone wearing that into battle." If the armor was so lavish it was worthless in actual combat, what use was it for strength? "Sometimes the enemy isn't a bloody battlefield," Lex replied. "This kind of armor was meant to make Alexander seem sacred, inviolable on certain occasions." "Are you a history buff now?" Clark asked, surprised that the entrepreneur's heir knew so much. Lex's voice was measured. "I'm interested in those who dominated the world before the age of 30. His tone carried ambition and a touch of arrogance. "If I recall correctly, Alexander died at 33, David said mildly. Lex's smile faltered for a beat, then returned. They lingered before the glittering armor, a small, tense island of civility amid the day's darker currents. Next chapter in an hour. Recommend a friend's book. Easy and smooth, seasoned writing, a simplified cultivation novel, very well written. Interested readers can bookmark and read it. Lex's smile tightened. Clark patted his shoulder and laughed to break the awkwardness. Lex, life isn't meaningful only if you rule the world. In the distance, a graceful figure walked by, Lana, and Clark couldn't help smiling. He moved to go greet her. Whitney was with her. The daytime football practice had just ended, and Whitney, having heard Lana would be there, had followed with a ticket in hand, hoping for a chance to reconcile with his ex. Seeing them chat easily together, Clark's expression darkened. Life still needs a little drive, don't you think, Clark? Lex said, patting his shoulder again. Only a man who dares to charge forward can win a lady's favor. He gave the advice with a smile, trying to draw Clark out, grateful in his own way for Clark's earlier act of saving him. I'm going out for some fresh air, Clark said and left. Not far away, Lana wore a pale pink dress and a green crystal necklace that gleamed against her fair throat. Clark's mood soured. David shook his head. This was his brother's own doing, and wandered through the museum hall. The Egyptian exhibits were less ostentatious than the armor they had seen earlier, but had a quiet, ancient charm all their own. Are you still going to run? Someone called. In the bushes nearby, Detective Jack Fran looked brutal as he slammed a man to the ground with a punch. The man, blood at the corner of his mouth, begged, Please, let me go. I don't know where the company's confidential client files are. Since you don't want to work for me, prepare to spend a few years inside, Fran growled. He flipped the man roughly, pulled out handcuffs, and threatened him. Fran was a detective who prowled the gray line between law and leverage, using other people's dark secrets to coerce them into working for him. But detective work was only a job. What he liked was money. If there was profit to be had, he stepped over any line. Clark stepped out of the museum into the night and took several deep breaths of cool air, gazing at the dense glass and steel skyline. Compared to Smallville, this place felt like another world, so prosperous and vast. Then his eyes found the quieter street, desolate and almost asleep. Beneath a bus stop sign, a homeless man in ragged clothes was curled on a bench, his small dog tucked beside him. It doesn't seem to make much difference, Clark murmured, a trace of helplessness in his voice. A city bus rounded the corner and pulled toward the stop. As it neared, the driver's face turned ashen. He was having a heart attack, and then he slumped, unconscious. The wheel veered. The bus, heavy and unstoppable, was heading straight for the stop, on course to smash through the shelter and crush the sleeping man. Oh no, Clark shouted. Without thinking, his body moved faster than his mind. He crossed dozens of meters in an instant and put himself between the bus and the stop, reaching a hand out to stop the vehicle and shield the homeless man. Under normal physics, the bus's mass and inertia should have crushed him. The driver would almost certainly have died. No, Clark thought, bracing for the impact. At the last moment, something impossible happened. An invisible, strange barrier blossomed around the bus as if an unseen shield had wrapped itself over the vehicle. The bus slammed against it with a thunderous noise and came to an abrupt halt. Where Clark's hand had touched the front, there was only a slight dent. The homeless man was unharmed. The driver, still groaning in pain, was alive. Clark stared down at his palms, stunned. How had that happened? It made no scientific sense. In the bushes, Fran paused mid-interrogation as the sound reached him. He looked up and after a stunned second saw the driver's groans and then Clark ripping open the bus doors. Clark lifted the stricken man and vanished into the night, rushing toward Metropolis Hospital. Fran stared at the clear dent and then at the empty street, certain he had not imagined what he'd seen. His heart raced. Everyone had secrets, and now he seemed to have discovered a colossal one. The next morning at the kitchen table, Jonathan and Martha ate breakfast and chatted about the museum. Martha smiled. The museum was wonderful, it's just... Clark hesitated on the stairs. What? Jonathan set down his spoon. Sitting at the table, David handed over the morning paper and said quietly, There was a small incident last night. The headline read, Out of control late-night bus nearly runs over homeless man. I stopped it, Clark said, the memory still odd and raw. Martha's face went pale with worry. Are you all right, Clark? Of course their son, who seemed made of steel, was unharmed. Clark scratched his head. I'm fine, Ma. Clark, you saved a life. I'm very proud of you, Martha said. Jonathan frowned after reading the article. But did anyone see you? It was late. No one was on the main road. Everyone was in the museum. There were no witnesses reported, David said. The paper didn't mention anyone seeing it, so that should be fine. That's good, Martha breathed, relieved. Eat and go to school, or you'll miss the bus, Jonathan said with a smile. Clark had barely slept. He and David had both seen something impossible. David suspected a bioforce field, like the one that could allow flight in theories Clark had heard about, but Clark had no idea how he had produced it. He was shaken, and he couldn't focus in class all morning. When school let out at noon, Clark grabbed David. They planned to head to the woods on the edge of town to experiment and try to control whatever ability had surfaced. They were passing through a narrow alley when a middle-aged man stepped out, badge flashing, a predatory smile on his face. Clark Kent? David Kent, he asked, blocking their path. Gentlemen, he added, showing his Metropolis police badge. Metropolis Police Detective Jack Fran. There's a traffic accident. I'd like you to help me investigate. A city detective, Clark's chest tightened. Had Fran been watching last night? The detective's smug expression suggested he believed he'd found leverage. David narrowed his eyes. 37. Are you interested in taking a bet with me? In the alley, Fran produced 2 surveillance photos. They'd been pulled from the museum's camera. Clark and David standing with Luther. You were really hard to find, Clark, he said, shaking the pictures with a small smile. Lucky for me, you went to the museum that night. Clark only remembered the clothes, the haircut, and half a profile. Finding someone from that was nearly impossible. It was late, the city almost deserted. The Metropolis Museum was the only place with an exhibition party. Fran had taken a gamble, and it had paid off. With these, it won't be hard for me, as a police detective, to find the 2 of you. Officer, Clark said cautiously, swallowing. A cop had sought him out alone, claiming something about a traffic accident. Something about it felt off. David stood to the side, arms crossed, watching with a cool, unreadable expression. What do you want from us? Fran's eyes gleamed, as if he'd spotted a rare animal in a zoo. He reached out and squeezed Clark's arm. Clark reflexively brushed his hand away. Fran looked surprised, then triumphant. Careful, you're stronger than you look. I don't know what you mean, Clark said. Don't play dumb. I saw you last night. Fran lowered his voice, leaned in, and smirked like he knew a secret. An excellent performance, stopping an out-of-control city bus with one hand. Clark's face went pale. He opened his mouth. Clark, are you still going to pretend? Fran interrupted, shaking his head as if he'd caught him red-handed. You're not that naive. David's expression hardened. Even the gentlest elephant isn't someone you casually provoke, he said coldly. Fran ignored the threat aimed at him. He'd come for Clark. David was just a bonus obstruction. I know what you are, what your family is hiding. He pointed to Clark and David. Clark, you've had this strength since you were a kid. You never joined school sports. You never fought back. Your adoptive parents work a farm for next to nothing, and they hide you away. Fran's tone was clinical, practiced. He'd done his homework. Blackmail lived in the gray areas, and he'd spent enough time studying this family to be confident. You want a quiet, stable life, he said. It would be a shame to waste talent like yours on a farm. So what do you want? Clark snapped. Fran's smile turned cold. Help me handle a few notorious gangs we can't otherwise pin charges on. In exchange, I keep quiet. If I don't get what I want by a certain time, an email will automatically be sent to every major media outlet with information about your family. He let the threat hang in the air. What do you think will happen then? You'll become the hottest story in Metropolis, maybe the world. Clark's hands clenched. Don't drag my parents into this, he growled, grabbing Fran by the lapel. Lower your voice, Clark, Fran said, amused, placing a finger against Clark's lips. Don't let anyone hear your secret. He studied him a moment longer. I'm a straight cop. I'm not asking you to kill anyone. Subduing them is enough. You want me to. What, take down murder charges? Clark choked out. If you can't kill them, subdue them. That's fine. Fran shrugged. Money was what motivated him. Taking down a few of Metropolis's biggest criminal enterprises would make him set for life. He'd told himself he was doing the city a favor too, but his leverage was the secret he'd dug up. It isn't complicated. Clark was furious, frightened, and beside himself with regret. If only he'd been more careful the night before. The incident had happened too quickly for him to check his surroundings. He opened his mouth, then closed it. From the shadows, David clapped softly. "Bold, yet cautious," he said without hurry. "Those are essential qualities for a gambler." Fran's confidence wavered for the first time. David had been watching the whole exchange without a flicker of panic. He'd remained cold, almost amused, like someone watching an insect thrash itself. Fran had expected a scared boy. Instead, he'd found composure, an eerie, contained certainty. He'd never paid much attention to David Kent before. High school fights, nothing remarkable. But David's presence suggested something else, something Fran hadn't anticipated. "Are you interested in making a bet with me?" Fran asked. He was gambling. His confidence was over 80%, but not a sure thing. The payoff, if he won, would be everything. David reached into his pocket and produced a 50-cent coin. "What do you want to bet?" he asked. Seeing the coin, Fran forced a smile, while a cold unease slid through him. He hadn't fully assessed the other brother. David hadn't shown any panic, no flashes of fear, only a calm that seemed almost ancient. Was that the reason Clark's parents had been so careful? Was David the real threat? Fran studied him, trying to read that sky-blue face and the motionless hands. If he'd misjudged them, the game could end badly. But he'd already committed to the gamble. He showed his cards, quietly betting the family's silence against whatever this boy and his brother could do. The alley held its breath. "You're awake?" David's voice was soft, almost casual. He held a 50-cent coin between two fingers and wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've heard that. Over the centuries, there have been fighters among humans who could be tortured a dozen different ways and still never tell their enemies anything," he said. The coin flashed in the fluorescent light. "I'll bet you 50 cents you're not one of them. If, in half an hour, you're not on your knees spilling everything I want to know, emails, passwords, you'll owe me 50 cents, he added, as if making an ordinary wager. Fran laughed before he realized how hollow it sounded. "You're 17. Where did you learn about torture, on television?" But the laugh died in his throat. David's smile didn't change, yet there was something in the way he said it that made Fran's scalp prickle. A predator's calm, and suddenly Fran felt very small. "David, what are you doing?" he asked, backing away. Clark moved faster than Fran expected. He stepped between them, his expression hardening. The idea that his younger brother might torture someone, something inhuman and illegal, had stunned him. "David, don't," Clark said. "You can't do this." David looked at Clark like he'd caught him off guard. "Still playing the saint, are you? Now isn't the time for charity." Clark tightened his jaw. Pleading felt useless. The situation demanded more than words. He grabbed David's wrist, trying to block him. "If you do this and something goes wrong, if he doesn't come back on time, his email will send out a message. You might not even get the chance to question him." "It won't take half an hour," David said. 10 minutes, maybe less." "You can't risk Mom and Dad for this," Clark insisted, voice low. "Just let him go. These are gang members. Leave it to the police." David sneered. "I didn't realize you'd be so flexible, Clark. You're talking about crossing a line." Clark's grip tightened. "I can't let you do this." "For what exactly?" David said. He rolled his shoulders as if annoyed at the interruption. "Let me try." Clark's defenses wavered. He'd always been the older brother who wanted to protect, who believed compromise sometimes kept worse things from happening. "If you insist, at least be careful." David stepped back, almost indulgent. "Put aside everything else. Your speed's at least 10 times greater than mine. If you run with someone, there's no way I could even touch their clothes." Clark's eyes lit with a brief, foolish hope. "So you'll stand down?" David sighed, but it wasn't surrender. He reached into his pocket and produced a small box. He opened it. A thumb-sized green crystal glowed with an eerie inner light. "A meteorite?" Clark's voice broke. The light washed over him and his legs went weak. He grabbed the wall to steady himself as the world tilted. "You, David." The crystal's radiation sapped him. David moved forward, quick and cold. The fist that landed on Clark's face hit like a hammer. Clark crumpled to the floor, unconscious in an instant. David tossed the glowing stone beside him to keep him down, just in case the sun of Krypton stirred under sunlight. David didn't hesitate. He walked out of the alley. At the end of the town street, Fran had been loitering by a lamppost, pretending to look nonchalant. He hadn't gone far. He'd wanted to be found. A sudden voice behind him made him spin around. Waiting for someone? David was there, expression unreadable. Where's Clark? Fran demanded. He couldn't make it, David said. There was no remorse in his tone. Before Fran could react, David punched him hard and grabbed him like a child, hauling him off into a deserted factory. When Fran came to, he was tied to a chair with rough rope, his wrists and feet bound, the wood biting into his palms. The room smelled of dust and oil. A laptop sat open on a wooden table, and David was seated behind it, calm and composed. He slid the 50-cent coin across the table toward Fran, then pulled on surgical rubber gloves with slow, deliberate movements. Fran swallowed hard. He tried to wrench free of the ropes, but they held. David smiled. You're awake? He leaned forward, the gloves creaking slightly. Our bet has begun. Please continue reading, Fran saw David coming and tried desperately to get away, but he couldn't. Help! Help! He shouted, his voice hollow in the empty factory. No one would hear him out here in the suburbs. David walked closer, each step like a knell. Fran's heart hammered. Fear clawed at him. Listen, he managed. Imprisoning and harming a detective is a federal crime. He sounded like a boy trying to bluff his way out of something he didn't fully understand. David didn't answer. Calmly, almost methodically, he knocked the chair back so Fran tumbled to the concrete, shoved his head upright, and jammed a wet towel over his face. Since the Middle Ages, waterboarding has been called one of the most inhumane tortures in history, David said flatly, his voice edged with something cold. I like it. It's simple, efficient, and leaves little blood. No, no, Fran screamed as the meaning of the towel sank in. His hands and feet were bound. He couldn't move. David held a heavy bucket with one steady hand and tipped it. Slow, steady water poured through the cloth, overwhelming Fran's nose and mouth. Help! Help! He muffled, but the sound was swallowed by the rush of water. The towel pressed down, air vanished. Fran choked, his lungs clawing for breath. In less than half a minute, oxygen left his blood and panic set in. His neck veins stood out, his legs kicked reflexively, wild and pointless. Take a deep breath. Dizziness is normal, David said almost kindly, and the word kindly made his voice colder still. The interrogation had begun. Fran gagged and swallowed. Water filled his stomach, his lungs, his bronchi. He tried to scream, only to be drowned by another wave. Terror echoed through the empty factory. David spoke over Fran's muffled cries. From the Spanish Inquisition to modern intelligence agencies, 80% of those who were waterboarded died. I hope you're not one of the 20%, Jack Fran. There was a hint of expectation in his tone. The rest were just victims the executioners accidentally killed. The suffocating pain broke Fran's will. After 30 seconds, he began to try anything to convey a confession, to say whatever would make the water stop, but he couldn't form words. His body went rigid with exhaustion and oxygen deprivation. His hands twitched. His face went ashen. After 2 minutes, David set the bucket down. Prolonged waterboarding often causes incontinence. He didn't want a scene. When the towel came off, Fran's face was streaked with tears and snot. He gulped air like a fish flung back into water. After 10 seconds, his pupils refocused. He looked at David like a man pulled back from the edge of hell, trembling, pleading with his eyes. David raised an eyebrow and smiled as if he'd just remembered something. Oh, right, he said. I forgot to tell you how you could have told me you wanted to confess. Fran's shaking made a sound that could have been a sob. Devil, he blurted. You've wasted a lot of my time, David said, his expression closing up. Tell me what I want to know, or do you want a second round? I'll tell you. Fran snapped, as if electrocuted by fear. If he'd not been tied to the chair, he'd have been on his knees, begging. David tapped a key on his laptop, canceled, and deleted a scheduled email with a single motion, then closed the lid. Thanks for your cooperation, he said. Fran, still reeling, tried to speak. You're not an ordinary person. David seemed not to catch it. Just now your hand was like an iron clamp, abnormally strong. I couldn't pry it off my face no matter how I tried. Fran remembered the pressure on his cheekbones, felt it again, and understood. He stared at David as if at some monstrous thing. Clark had treated his brother as a fearsome opponent. Clark had promised, then vanished. There was only one explanation left. You're worse than your brother, A monster. I don't like the word monster, David said, stepping in front of him so his shadow fell over Fran. I just have a few tricks for dealing with Clark. What are you going to do? Fran croaked from the chair. Fear had curdled his voice. Sorry, David said. The best way to keep a secret is dead men. He flicked a coin between his fingers. The 50-cent piece flew with deadly speed. It punched through the air, through Fran's skull, and embedded itself in the brick wall behind him, leaving a smear of blood on the masonry. Fran's eyes went wide in sudden, indescribable pain and surprise. The chair toppled, dust billowed. He slumped, unmoving. Even if you lost, these 50 cents are still for you, David said softly, as if returning a trivial object. Later that afternoon, in the attic of the warehouse, Clark came back from a frantic search. He'd woken at noon, thrown the kryptonite into the sewer, and canvassed the town for Fran, but he'd found nothing. He arrived angry and out of breath. David, leaning by the window and looking out at the night, answered simply, "Yes." "You killed him, David?" Clark asked, stunned. He hadn't expected his brother to admit it so easily. "I handled it cleanly," David replied. He had no qualms about killing. The reason he hadn't killed the metahumans before had been strategic. He'd wanted to keep the emotional leverage. Fran had been an ordinary man, of no use alive. The body was hidden beneath the concrete floor of the abandoned factory. No one would find it. Clark's voice went low. "My point is, he might not have done anything that serious. That detective, he was good at bluffing and threatening, but that doesn't mean he'd committed a felony. If he'd been a criminal that bad, the station would have caught him long ago." "Your faith in his innocence is laughable, brother," David said, shaking his head as if Clark's argument had been predictable. He turned the laptop on the attic table toward Clark and pressed play. In the video, Fran sat tied to a chair, snot and tears streaking his face as he confessed to his past crimes. He admitted to selling informant data to gangs, secretly sabotaging colleagues he'd clashed with, framing rivals to block promotions, threatening people to steal business secrets. Crimes enough, he said, to have deserved execution 5 or 6 times over. Near the end, he spoke of controlling Clark. His voice trembled as he described his plan. If Clark didn't obey, he'd teach him a lesson, plant bodies and illegal guns in the barn, frame their father for murder, send their father to prison. Only then, Fran said, would he have true leverage over their family. The fear in his voice was real, but so was the cold, calculating plan behind it. Clark watched the video in silence. Maybe his brother had been right. He'd been too naive, holding on to hope that wasn't warranted. He felt the chill of that mistake. "I was wrong about this," he admitted inwardly. When the video ended, Clark turned to David with a look that mixed displeasure and fear. "You shouldn't kill people, brother," he said, earnest. "You haven't even finished high school, and yet you can beat someone into a vegetative state, torture confessions out of them, dispose of bodies without blinking. I'm scared." David, technically still a minor, had already done things that would make many adults shudder. Clark's worry wasn't only about the act of killing, it was about what that meant for David's future. Somewhere in Clark's head, a cold, almost clinical tally clicked. Concern 35. Template fusion, 96%. David's answer was blunt. "What do you think of soldiers who killed in the war? Are they uncontrollable, evil-minded murderers?" "Of course not," Clark said. "Defending one's country wasn't a crime." "Then don't bother me again," David replied. The conversation closed. "I'm protecting this home from any outside trouble or destruction." He turned and walked away. Clark watched his brothers retreating back and opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. If David continued like this, maybe there was nothing Clark could do, until some point where, if unchecked, events would spiral past the point of no return. Today, David had crossed a line. He'd killed without apparent remorse, as if crushing an insect. The thought echoed the dark visions Cassandra had shown him. Their meaning flashed in his mind like frames of a nightmare. Outside, clouds gathered and cold rain tapped at the windows. Metropolis Environmental Center, top floor. The office windows were bright and clean, overlooking umbrellas bobbing in the street below. A man in a crisp suit and tie stood looking out, hair slicked back, a fighter's tenacity written into his brow. He turned when someone entered. "Good morning, Mr. Rickman," the newcomer said. removing his leather gloves with a polite smile as he stepped in. He had brown hair and wore a long black overcoat. "I'm glad you could meet with me." Rickman, billionaire, ruthless and composed, sat casually across from him. "I hear your company is investigating Smallville and plans to acquire several farms," he said. "What are your plans?" "My plan is to build a new, large factory and create jobs and tax revenue for Metropolis," Rickman answered, spreading his hands as if the project were for everyone's benefit. Paul, who ran the environmental center, pulled a small bottle from the cabinet and set it on the desk. He stared at Rickman. "This is a groundwater sample taken from a site one of your factories recently built. There are so many parameters exceeding the standard that it looks worse than the factories registered under your name." Rickman didn't bother to look at the bottle. He merely pointed to the corner of the room where a water dispenser stood. "Did you know my company sponsored that dispenser? I had dinner with several of your colleagues 2 days ago." "Not everyone can be bought," Paul said, voice stiffening. "Tomorrow, I'll sign a restraining order to keep your company out of that town." He stood, hands braced on the table. "Listen, this is better for everyone. Let this go, or—" Rickman rose, his smile gone. "I've looked into the pesticide factories registered under your organization's name." His voice was low and controlled. "There are unusually high numbers of lawsuits from poisoned workers. You've suppressed them all." Paul slammed a thick folder onto the desk. "I've contacted enough people. I'm going to refile those suits. Mr. Rickman, you're going to be very busy defending yourselves." For a beat, Rickman's face darkened. Then he laughed, then shook his head in what looked like resignation. "You hit a nerve, Paul." He stepped close and laid a hand on Paul's shoulder. His palm brushed the back of Paul's neck, a casual movement that did more than comfort. Paul's pupils dilated for a moment. Admiration and closeness washed over him as if drawn on a string. Regret followed quickly. How could he have doubted Mr. Rickman, a man who had always supported the center? "I'm sorry, sir. Paul began, then stopped, deflated. "It's all right, Director Paul," Rickman said softly, easing an arm around him and guiding him to the window as if speaking to an old friend. "I admire your fighting spirit, but I would never buy anyone outright." "You're right," Paul said, embarrassed. "I shouldn't have doubted your integrity." Rickman looked over the city. "You've poured yourself into protecting people's health and the environment. Have any of you been rewarded for that? Do you own any of these buildings?" "No," Paul admitted. "My wife, my children and I, we still rent." Rickman's face softened with feigned pity. "What kind of life is that? Think about it, Paul." He patted Paul on the shoulder and left. A short while later, in the environmental center lobby, Rickman strode toward the glass doors like any successful businessman. At the same moment, a man came crashing down the stairwell and into the entranceway, smashing a taxi against the curb. Rickman barely flinched. "Taylor," he said into his phone, voice flat. "Get the car ready. We're heading to Smallville. I'll go have a word with those stubborn farmers." Noon sunlight poured through the Kent house windows when Clark and David opened the front door. The house, usually filled with the comforting smell of lunch, was eerily silent. The air felt tight and heavy. "Dad? Mom?" David stepped inside, frowning at the unusual tension. In the living room, Jonathan sat at the dining table with worry etched into his face. Martha stood nearby, furious, eyes red-rimmed. The couple looked like they'd had a fight neither wanted to give ground on, a rare and alarming sight in the warm, steady home the boys had known for years. "What is it?" Clark asked, eyeing the stack of documents Jonathan was riffling through. Martha's voice shook with anger. "How could you sell it without discussing it with me? Who told me this land was a Kent family heirloom? Who told me we would live here forever?" "What?" Both brothers froze. Everything had been normal that morning. Now, hours later, their home and land seemed to be gone. David stepped closer, disbelief spreading across his face. "Father, did you really sell our farm? Sell the Kent house?"